This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakeland.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking. And Menoth John in the third chair.
Somebody say Ron? Hey, Ron!
With contributions from Total Fangirl.
Vampires do not sparkle.
And our loyal listener.
Are you crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming. Come here to the speed of an overfed, free-range black dragon with a taste for slaver flesh.
Ooh.
Today's edition is brought to you by all of our friends over at Patreon, the ladies and gentlemen who keep the lights on. And this time around, we're talking about the Andrew crew. Andrew Sipes, Andrew Wallaker, Andrew Ralph, Andy Rucker, and out of the Andrew crew into Angus McKee season. I'm Geekly McNerdigan, your host. Today our panelists are Russ Waterspout Wakeland and special guest John Chrome Yellow Christensen, president of for life of Warmachine Hordes, painter par excellence, and vodcaster extraordinaire. Let's begin. Issue number 1. One of the many problems with being a miniatures gamer is the challenge of finding not just a group of people who want to play the same game as you, but to have them want to play that game week after week to the exclusion of other games. In a world increasingly filled with more and more gaming options, this challenge becomes harder and harder to overcome. Question: what is the best way to lure players to your preferred games, not including pharmacological enticements, illegal pay-for-play schemes, or kidnapping? Renegade Legion Russ.
I'm gonna go with food.
Jump Trooper John.
Set up a Pokestop with Mountain Dew.
Ooh.
Interesting, both of you. There are a plethora of ways, really, but if you're going to discount drugging, bribing, or kidnapping, your avenues are scarce. And I'm going to go with Russ's favorite, offering a nice chilled Diet Coke. Sadly, Russ, because it was your answer and you weren't specific, that makes you wrong! And Pokey's just wrong anyway. Issue number 2. When painting miniatures, there are as many techniques for getting started as there are miniature painters. Whether you're priming, what color you're priming with, what you do right after, whether you paint outside in or inside out, every decision you make will impact the final result, and it's all up to you. Question: one of the most popular ways to start painting nowadays is to prime with black and then dry brush with lighter colors all the way up to white, possibly. Some of us have been using this technique for years, long before it needed a name. But apparently, it needs a name now. What is that name? Rufus Russ.
Graduated painting.
Jonquil John.
Zenithal shading.
Interestingly enough, it's called blackwashing, of course. Of course. You're not washing anything, and you're certainly not washing anything in black. Clearly no one asked me what I thought when they decided to name this technique I've been using for decades. So wrong, either way, and bigger. Issue number 3. Game of Thrones, the television adaptation of George R.R. Martin's ongoing magnum opus, A Song of Ice and Fire, has been roaring through the small screen since April 17th, 2011, and plans on continuing to fill our living rooms with sex, violence, and dragons through to 2018. In the 2016 season, this series outpaced its source material for the first time, presenting readers and non-readers alike with a plethora of new materials and, for the first time, neatly tied up plot points. Question: what percentage of chance do you give George R.R. Martin for finishing A Song of Ice and Fire at all, before, after, or during the HBO series? Rickard Russ.
0.
Gendry John.
Negative infinity.
Yeah, Wakeland, I gotcha. Because you, of course, don't know everything. There is a top-secret government project, known only as the Gemini Project, that has already created a series of George R.R. Martin clones to ensure that the entire U.S. economy does not crash due to his death before the story is ended. I believe they're already on to clone 23, so things are not going well.
It's like Moon.
Issue number 4. By far the most costly factor when puzzling out the life of a miniature gamer is the concept of commitment. With so many games out there and the need to buy, build, convert, paint, transport, not to mention learn new rules and keep current with the ever-changing world of new releases, clarifications, new additions, and FAQs, being able to stick to one game is the only way you can really assure yourself that you're going to make it out alive. Question: what is the ideal number of minis games one gamer can comfortably keep in their mind, budget, and time allowance and still stay sane? Retinue Russ.
3.
Justify John.
Oh, the best option is just not to play.
That I'll give you an honorary true. But sadly, well, since that information is not even remotely available anywhere in the world, let's see. I've currently got, I think my number is 11 right now, and I'm pretty sane and Most of my bills get paid on time, so let's go with 11, shall we? Because that makes Wakeland wrong! That's it for now. Thanks for listening, and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by Lone Wolf Development. Take your game to the next level.
And by Geek Nation Tours. Rise up and join the Geek Nation, touring the world at geeknationtours.com.
And by Audible. Try the service, get a free book, and support the show. All by visiting audibletrial.com/D6G. Hello!
Hello!
Hello.
Hey, welcome to episode 194, Craig.
Oh, jeez. 194.
Of the D6 Generation. I'm Russ Wakeland.
I'm Craig Gallant.
And I'm John Christensen.
Hey, Craig, it's the president for life of Warmachine and Hordes on our little show.
Thank you.
John, this is thrilling.
Oh, that's not it.
And we just had the Prime Minister on not too long. John. I don't know if you heard that.
I have to tell you, I agree with your choice as Norbert for Prime Minister.
Excellent, because I feel like now we are like the United Nations of Warmachine and Hordes here, having both the President and Prime Minister on.
Which is a good thing that we've got a really solid rule set now.
Right, exactly.
Nothing else is going to get done.
No, correct. That's excellent. So to have, John here, and John, of course, world famous as, of course, the president of Warmachine and Hordes for Life, but also you have your own.
I think more world famous for his pseudonym Menoth John.
Exactly
yes.
right.
And how he got that.
Mr. Painting himself there
right.
with his own video cast. Painting
Indeed.
and beverage consumption every Sunday night, right, John?
Absolutely.
Which is...
Although I've found that by drinking all of that beer on Sunday night, I put on an enormous amount of weight. And so I woke up about a week ago and said, well, this has got to stop. And I decided to cheat and went low carb, and I've lost like 6 pounds, and I'm on my way. It's going to be amazing. So yeah. I'm backing off on the drinking a little bit on Painting with Menoth John, but we're still super sweet and totally legit.
So, John, just as a little tip here, you know that a shot of alcohol, same amount of alcohol, a lot less calories. Just throwing it out there.
As a matter of fact, Russ, I tried that on not last night's show, but the week before.
How'd that work out?
It's like Lay's potato chips. You can't just have one. And I was
bad.
Yeah.
I was in a rough place by the end of my 90-minute show.
But you were thinner. But and if you have enough of those, you're actually losing weight while you drink, if you think it through all the way.
You're a genius, Russ. I know I've had you on the show for some reason.
I see. This is how we roll. So anyway, so since we have John on, we thought it would be very appropriate to talk about painting. Craig,
it would make a lot of sense.
We haven't really revisited the painting topic in really some time. So we thought we'd kind of go through the latest tools, what John recommends, what Craig and I are doing now. Thought that'd be kind of fun. And then since we're talking about painting, that, of course, means we should talk about miniature games. And we really thought it'd be kind of fun to share sort of the life and times of a miniature gamer with you all.
Yes, we know it well.
We do, and sort of what are the challenges, and, sort of commiserate with those of you out there who are also miniature gamers, as well as maybe give you a little insight if you're maybe a board gamer or RPG gamer and always wondered what it must be like to be a miniature gamer in the miniature gaming world.
Absolutely, and I think it's really appropriate that I'm the one that gets to talk about this particular topic, because if it wasn't for you two in Hollywood, I wouldn't be a miniature gamer.
See, so you're blaming
we're
us
sort
then.
of viral that way.
Yeah, that's a problem. We accept, we do have a disclaimer on the show, John, that any life damaging decisions you may make as a result of our show we are not responsible for that. We have a lawyer who's still on retainer.
Yeah, he used to sit in the third chair if I remember right.
He does, but he's still on retainer for such a thing, which is why we give him a small interest in the show so we have access to him at any time. So,
well, I can only thank you for this hobby. I can't blame you for anything other than the thousands of dollars I no longer have.
we'll thank you, John.
What were you going to do with that anyway? Feed children?
Yeah,
exactly.
You
for your home
with you, right?
Totally overrated.
Stop world hunger. These things are not important. Anywho, before we get to all that, though, we do have a few announcements we should talk about. First of all, Craig, Gen Con is right around the corner.
It is immediately almost here already, yes.
When this show goes live, it will be the week of Gen Con, and Craig and I will be gallivanting around, if you will, Indianapolis, Indiana. Right.
I'm going to be pretending I'm on a pony the whole weekend.
Now John, have you...
galloping here, hither, thither, and yon.
Are you able to go to Gen Con this year, John?
This year, I am taking a pass. For the last 2 or 3 years, I have come down for a single day. where I would get up at stupid o'clock in the morning and then drive down to Indianapolis from Racine, Wisconsin.
Yep.
This year I'm going to take a pass on that, and unfortunately I will not get a chance to be at your awesome Play by Mob event.
Well, we wish you were, because our Play by Mob event, as always, is a heck of a lot of fun. It is Thursday night this year, right, Craig?
Yes, Thursday night, so that it doesn't coincide with anything important.
Conflicts with nothing of value. It's even it starts at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, so well after dinner. So you've had your dinner, you're a little bit sated, you're looking for somewhere to sit down and pass out, really. Let's be honest.
You're at that point where you're like, what am I going to do tonight?
Come on down to our show, because we're going to be there.
What you're going to do is come with us.
Right. Jump in on Rapid Fire, be in Achievements in Gaming, and even have a little, a little crazy contest of our own. You might even win something. You never know. So come on down. We hope to see you there Thursday, 9 o'clock at Gen Con in our world famous now, or infamous, as it might be, Craig, Play by Mob.
Yes, infamous indeed.
Also, that's the best place to catch Craig, myself, and Nicole in one spot. But also, Craig and I will be in the Dice Tower booth on the main floor Friday, 11 a.m., right, Craig?
Yes, indeed.
So you want to catch us there, come on down to that, say hello, and relieve us of our boredom, honestly.
Indeed. We'll just be hanging out, probably not talking to anybody.
Right.
Looking sort of disreputable, sort of sullying up the whole Dice Tower booth, if you will.
Now, Craig, I don't know if you remember this, but we were on our way to our usual coffee location.
I feel like it was a kidnapping.
When we had a wrong left turn, and we ended up in Starbucks.
Yes.
And we ran into Menoth John there. John, do you remember what we talked about in Starbucks?
Absolutely. The Game of Thrones is something that I care very much about. And we just wrapped up that 6th season. And it was a fabulous conversation, not spoiler-free, even a little bit.
No. In fact, I think we made some stuff up to spoil.
Right.
Several of the baristas wanted us to leave because they weren't caught up. And it was
awkward.
Cats and dogs living together.
Yeah.
Pandemonium.
Right.
Yeah. What was the structure of that rehash, Russ?
Well, that was Craig decided that the best way to do this, and I have to admit it was very efficient, was to summarize the season by deaths.
Yes.
So we went through season 6 by death, which actually did an incredibly good job of really doing
it touches
all the
on
plot
the people who killed them, the way they died, which therefore, once you've taken care of the deaths, there's really very little else in Game of Thrones to talk about.
And one of the few things you can say about Game of Thrones that doesn't spoil it is that someone will die. So that's been great. So, but it does also tell you there will be spoilers, because we'll be talking exactly about who died, and why they met their end. So,
indeed. Now, Russ, if somebody is all caught up and really wants to hear our take on Game of Thrones season 6, where would they be able to look for that?
The best way to do this, and I know it's hard to remember, is to go to patreon.com. And if you can't remember that, go to the d6generation.com and click on the giant orange P on the right-hand side. That will take you to Patreon. You can join us by tippage, a little money per episode. And if you happen to tip us $2 or more per episode, you get the entire library of lost chapters for free and in perpetuity as long as you keep tipping us. That's how it works. So we hope you'll join us that way. We want to thank all of our great patrons there to keep the lights on and help us do all these fun things like go to Gen Con and other such nonsense.
You betcha.
Patreon is, honest to God, the best thing that has ever happened to podcasting.
Really, really is.
Yeah, I mean, we use it over at Painting with Menoth John also. It's the difference between being able to do the show continuously and bring in great content and not being able to do it, because hosting isn't free, folks. And I can tell you with great certainty after recording with these guys, Russ and Craig work hard to make this show happen.
Oh, thanks, John. But it is true. So we thank you all for your support, and all of us out here in podcast land. Really, by doing that little bit of effort, you really remind us how much the work we do is helpful to everyone, and it brings people enjoyment. So it's really
I don't know about helpful.
Well, yeah, helpful is probably
maybe it brings people enjoyment, or at the very least,
level.
like distraction.
So anyway, what's it time now for, Craig?
Oh God! Almost every time. Oh,
Wow.
No. Achievements in gaming, I think. Wow.
That was terrible.
There's a lot of buttons on this board.
But we'll go with it. And, of course, Achievements, as always, is brought to you by our fine friends over at Patreon. So thanks to all those great guys and gals over there helping support the show. John, as our guest here, what have you been playing lately?
Well, for the most part, I've been playing, as far as tabletop games, I've been playing mostly Warmachine Hordes.
Excellent.
With Mark III coming out, it turns out that between having 4 major factions, I've got like a half a dozen lists for each faction that I want to play. This last weekend, I put a kind of a bow on my Troll Bloods and took them to the full Steam event. And folks, if you're a Warmachine Hordes player, you enjoy playing more casual type events, I highly recommend the full Steam. It's a thinly veiled steamroller tournament, which means that you are playing, to win, so to speak. But there is a great medal for best painted, which I was lucky enough to come across and win for my my Berka model. And I was able to win 2 out of 3, and all 3 games were amazing, and the people were great. So mostly playing Warmachine Hordes. Also, I'm involved in a play-by-email event, because as we were talking about, finding people to actually play games with is very highly dependent upon,
people,
location and stuff.
Right.
And one of the original listeners and readers of my old blog 100 years ago was very into Car Wars. And I played Car Wars when I was in high school, and he runs a play-by-email Car Wars game.
That is awesome.
It's a guy by the name of Jimmy Anderson. He's a super terrific guy out of Tennessee. If you're looking for it, folks, and you want to play some email Car Wars, look up Mad Hat Car Wars, Madhat Car Wars. Highly recommend it. Super sweet guy and does a great job running the games.
Nice.
And then with my kids, I've got a 12-year-old boy who's going on 45, and I have a 10-year-old boy who's going on 13, 15. We played some Arcadia Quest recently, which is really fun.
That's a fun game. Yeah.
Gave me a chance to play kind of more of a campaign type based board game with them. We enjoyed playing Zombies Keep Out. We played Blood Rage, and that's where I found out that my 12-year-old is far better at games now than I am, and that's disturbing to me.
The kids are really smart at these games. Like I thought I was, doing all right here. My kids destroy me constantly at these kind of board games. It's amazing.
I got massacred. I didn't even know what hit me.
Yeah.
He was comboing stuff and picking the exact right track to build his economy on. And I looked back at turn 3, and I looked at my younger son and said, well, this game's over. Who wants to re-rack? Because there's just no way we were coming back against him. So that's mostly what I've been doing from a tabletop thing. With work being as it is, it's been a little difficult, challenging to get a whole lot of gaming in, but Warmachine Hordes still tends to be my jam.
That's a very respectable slice of life there. Very impressive there, John.
Yeah.
Craig, how about yourself?
Well, Russ, let's see. I played another Warmachine game against you, and I took a page out of the Wakeland rulebook, and we played, and you were 10 points down.
Was I now?
Yes. As I said yesterday, don't make this sound like I didn't tell you after this. As soon as I realized what I had done, I texted Russ and let him know. And
he did.
He was like, oh, no problem. No big deal.
He copped to it immediately, which was fair enough.
I was like, oh my God.
It was good.
Because I had forgotten I had set up a couple different lists, and Russ was like, well, Craig, you're in a rush. What do you want to play? And I was like, I think my list is, I didn't even say think. I said my list is 15 points, and I accidentally played a 25-point list.
Against my 15
and I won!
Points.
Yay!
Handily, too, I might add. It was very impressive.
I've done the same thing. I put my list out one time and went, wow, that's a lot of models.
Yeah.
And then I went, well, that's because those 3 jacks over there are not in this list.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sadly, I didn't realize it till the next day.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
And then I just got back from Maine for vacation, and we do play a lot of games up in Maine. Usually classics. We played Carcassonne a bit.
Yeah, good one.
That's always fun. We played it without the farmers with the little kids, and then we played it with the farmers for the bigger kids. They were like, well, this is a much better game when you play with those guys laying down.
It is more interesting, isn't it?
It is more interesting. It's also much more difficult to score.
Yeah.
But pulled out Betrayal at House on the Hill. And it was, we had a new cottage this year that was actually right on the beach with a huge wraparound porch that faced the ocean. And it was amazing. The moon rose right above the water, the Atlantic Ocean every night. And, the last night we were there was a huge heat lightning storm that was surrounding the entire area except where the moon was. So we were playing Betrayal at House on the Hill on this open air porch with this lightning everywhere and this giant, nearly full moon. I tweeted my phone camera didn't really do it justice, but I did tweet out a picture of what it looked like. It was awesome. And then the surprise hit for me. I loved the game, but I didn't realize that Karen would latch onto it, and the kids loved it too. Was of course Dark Deeds published by Games and Gears, which I kind of wanted to jump in on because of I've been reading Terry Pratchett a lot lately. Like we said, the game seems very much in line with Discworld, but that's just a blast. It's hard to explain how to play, and which is weird. Well, to non-gamers, and then like one or two turns in, they're like, "Oh, totally get it," and then they're crushing you.
Yeah, now that game is real. The more you play the game, the better it gets. My kids love that. It's one of their. Whenever we pack games up to go anywhere, my daughter's always like, "Bring Dark Deeds. We love that one." So
yeah, and the components are beautiful.
It really is. Yeah.
And then I taught everybody how to play those games, and then my brother-in-law was like, "Okay, now you got to play one of my games." I was like, "Okay." So we played 31, also known as Scat, and I had to put $3 in.
I believe that's called gambling, Craig, and it's illegal in some states.
And I don't like it. I never liked it. I don't like losing. It's emotionally hard enough for me losing a game anyway.
Yeah.
When I'm also losing money, even just $3, I'm like, I don't care. And as they're going around and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're really smart with your knocking." In my head, I'm like, "You're not. What? It's all the cards that you get is all that. Whatever." So yeah. So once again, I took the plunge, and I still don't like straight up card games or gambling.
There you go.
What about you, Russ?
I got 2 games of Warmachine in. One versus one of our local.
One hopefully with equal point values.
I played Blake, equal points. Blake Hooper is one of our stronger Warmachine players in our area. I would say he's already won a couple tournaments locally here in 3rd edition.
He's extremely good.
And managed to pull out the win against Blake with Striker 2. I was very happy against Crix, John, which was
well done.
Which he was playing. Who's the dude that came out from Warmachine Tactics? The caster who's Signar, but then dies and becomes Crix. That guy.
Oh God. Thanks. Sturgis.
Sturgis. Yeah. So I was playing Evil Sturgis against Evil Sturgis with Striker 2, Striker 2 had a good run. Rolled an 18 for strength when he got in on him, and that was pretty much the end of that.
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
You take 50 points of damage. What do you got there? Oh, he's dead. Okay. Yeah, you can use one focus to block 5. That's fine. That was a great game. Love playing against Blake. And then, of course, I lost to Craig, but we all know what happened there. So, moving on.
No hate.
No. It was all good. Actually, it didn't matter because as Craig knows, like I think I've played Blake like countless times and only beaten him like twice or 3 times tops. So
it was an awesome game to watch.
My day couldn't have gotten any better. It was already, and then playing Craig and losing didn't matter. It's like, I don't care. I beat Blake today. Everything's good.
And finding out that you were 10 points down. I know.
Better. It was all win. It was all good. I also played more 5th edition, or my Dungeons & Dragons 5e campaign with my daughter's niece and nephew. We've reached the point now where they're in a swamp, and I was explaining to my girls that a swamp in an RPG campaign is like the Minecart level in every video game. You must have one. So we are now in the obligatory swamp level and having a good time there. They managed to not be eaten by alligators. It's always a win. We had some friends over on Friday night, just a grown-up gaming night. I won't say how many bottles of alcohol were consumed, but there was at least 4 empty bottles by the end of the evening, which was
very nice.
Pretty good. We played the
this is not like you to be keeping track of bottles.
They brought over some great wine.
Usually one margarita is enough to knock you flat.
I've discovered I like mead. So mead is very dangerous.
Mead's delicious.
Oh, it's very the good news
mead is brutal.
But the good news is the bottles are small.
Yes, it is.
So while it's 4 bottles, they're not giant.
Mead because you're like, it's a delicious drink that can't possibly do me any harm.
What could be wrong with that? So we played Pirate Tunes first, which is the new game from Stronghold Games. I've been calling it Galaxy Trucker Light. So you're basically building little pirate ships. But what's cool is you're trying to recruit bits to add to your pirate ships, but it's all being done in real time. But instead of just grabbing stuff, you're basically putting little pirate meeples on parts and trying to grab them. You got to stack them in a certain way the meeples don't fall off. A lot of fun, this little game. We had a great time with that. And then, Craig, our friends brought over the brand new hotness Side. Have you seen this game?
I have seen it, yes.
Oh, man. So they have the collector. It just came out from Kickstarter. It finally was shipped. This is the game. It was $100 on Kickstarter if you got it at the right time.
Now, here's a question for you, Russ.
Yeah.
Who were your friends?
Jeremy and Megan.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
They were playing correctly, so you're all set.
Yes. So they have...
That game got played like 20 times that weekend, and we found out at Dave and Andy's birthday that it was only played correctly by like 3 different groups.
I think we played it right. And
no, you did.
It's amazing components.
Jeremy and Megan are very good with rules.
Yeah, it was amazing components. I mean, amazing, like...
Yeah, looks beautiful.
This is like the Industrial Revolution, but there's mecha sort of thing going on here. And you got like 5 factions, but it's not just combat. It's also like really nuanced thing. There's like cool models. There's plastics. There's bits for every resource, bags of food, logs of wood. Like, it's just amazing art. Everything's amazing about it. It was just a joy to have on the table. And they have the big giant board version.
Yeah.
So we played that. It was just awesome. So check out, if you see the full collectible version of Scythe, I would pick it up, although you'll probably see it for like $200 or $300, and it's totally worth it if you bought all the points separately. But if you got the Kickstarter on that, you got a deal, because that is quite the good-looking game.
Yep.
So that's all that. What about modeling? John, what have you been doing for painting lately? I know you paint at least every Sunday, so you got to have something on the list.
Yeah, turns out I backed myself into a corner. Just before Lock and Load, which was at the beginning of June, I had set myself a goal to get myself 100% painted on all of my major factions, with the exception of Mercs, and that's Protectorates, Retribution, Trolls, Minions, and I wanted to be 100% on those guys. So I did that, and I was very happy with that.
That's awesome.
But turns out when you have a show every Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. Central on twitch.tv/Menoth John,
right?
Totally not a plug.
No.
That you need something to paint. So I backed myself into a corner, and I went ahead and I purchased the Protectorate of Menoth Battle Box, basically to get the new caster Malachus, because I've heard great things about him.
Yeah.
And so I put him together.
Now, how are you liking the new plastics there?
Don't like them.
Oh.
Wish Privateer would kind of decide if they're going to go with hard plastics or this rustic stuff, and I don't particularly care for the new plastics, and I think the decision to make them different colors was a mistake, because the pigments that they're putting in there, I've noticed a difference in the density of the plastic between the Protectorate models that I just put together and the gray stuff.
Yeah.
So they say it's the same plastic, but it appears that the pigments are having some level of effect, and I'm hearing that from more than just myself too. Other friends of mine are saying the same thing.
Now, are the new ones hard plastic?
No, they're the same rustic. They're the same rustic that they've been using for the Jack kits and some of the infantry now for, 2-3 years?
Yeah, since they started. Do they have any hard plastic?
Yes, they do. They've been moving to hard plastic in a lot of the Colossals and things like that. So right now, the Convergence of Cirrus has both of their Colossals.
Both of them? Oh.
Yeah, they sell you a single kit that you can make either one of the Colossals out of, because they're based off the same chassis. And that's one of the reasons why they are so far behind on releasing so many of these models, is because they're still cutting their teeth on polystyrene, and they're having some production. I think they're having some production issues. But
sounds like a question we should ask Matt, Russ.
I am making notes now.
You're gonna have Matt Wilson on?
We're gonna chat with him at Gen Con. Yeah, so we're excited.
Okay.
About that. Yeah.
I had David Carl on my show last night, and we were talking a little bit about a lot of different things in the state of miniature gaming, and I think that they're trying. I would say that one thing I will say is that they appear to be improving on mold line location, but I still had the classic mold line across the top of the head on my Malachus. So hopefully things will continue. No negativity. We're trying to keep it on the positive tip.
No hate. Yeah, right.
No hate. But I'm a little bit disappointed. I'll just put it that way.
Now they went for. You said they went different colors, right? Each of the sets is a different color, so you could. It's sort of like a board game feel where you just assemble your dudes, your Khador are red and your Signar are blue kind of thing. Yeah.
You guys remember back in the day they released a board game called Grind?
Yes. Yeah.
These models look so much like Grind models.
Oh no, Grind models are not very well detailed. Yeah.
Yeah, they're better.
Yeah.
They're better than Grind model, but they still have that look like they just came out of a board game. And some board games these days, that's not the slam it used to be.
No,
right. Yeah.
But I'm disappointed.
Have you
and
seen
I think they had the opportunity with these new battle boxes to do something really different and
they didn't,
maybe on a product that they knew they were going to move a lot of, that they could have afforded the tooling for the real plastic.
Yeah.
But not today.
That's
this is
a shame.
not that day.
That's a shame. Well, it sounds like they're like about the Undercity level, right? Have you seen the Undercity models?
Yeah.
They're about like that? Yeah.
Yep, they're a lot like that.
Yeah.
They're a lot like that. So I got that, and in future episodes on the Sunday night extravaganza, we're going to be doing some Protectorate. Like I said, I played in that full Steam event, and I was fortunate enough to come across with some gift certificates, so I invested that into a Guild Ball Hunters starter set.
Oh, the Hunters!
Yeah, because I had to have Cena. I had to have the bear.
How do you not have the bear?
Of course.
Right.
And the bear is not cheap, because that thing is white metal.
Yeah.
And it weighs about 40 pounds. But I just want to, when I'm playing Guild Ball, here comes Cena. Ba-da-da-da. I'm gonna have he'll have his own little entrance music and the whole 9 yards. It'll be fantastic.
That's awesome.
And then last night on the show, I was painting Rivet Wars. So I was painting a Blight Bomber. That's a Cool Mini or Not, I think, board game that came out. It's a Weird World 1.
Oh, yeah.
World War
I have the complete set and all the expansions. I love that game. It's one of my favorite of their games. I love it.
Yeah, I love it. The rule set is fantastic.
It really is.
The models are amazing.
You have all the plastic terrain, so it like turns your little bunkers into plastic and everything?
Yes, I do. I went all in on the Kickstarter.
I did too. I got the airplanes, the biplane. Oh, it's so good.
So for those of you who like Rivet Wars, Gen Con is where I actually picked up the only one I did not buy was the Flyers. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to hate myself forever. I'm never going to get the Battle of Brighton.
You would, right?
And Gen Con, I was able to find it. So have hope. Nice. Go visit them. I'm sure they would appreciate you buying some Rivet Wars from them.
Oh man, I'm looking at
other stuff.
John, I'm looking at Cena now because I just pulled out my Guild Ball Season 2 book, and man, that is an awesome looking drawing. I haven't seen the model yet. Is the model close to the quality of the drawing in the book?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's typical Guild Ball. The level of detail is fantastic. I have so much fun painting those miniatures.
They're awesome. The assembly's a little tricky on some of them because they're very detailed. Kind of reminds me of Weird a little bit.
Another friend of mine has put Cena together, and he says you can basically it's one of the few biological models that he's worked with that just went together.
Oh, nice.
So, man, after doing a bunch of trolls, I'll tell you what, I wake up with like post-traumatic stress disorder from some of those models.
Yeah, the metals are tough.
Other than that, I just finished painting the Gobber Tinker, which was a really flavorful and super fun model from the Minions faction of Warmachine Hordes and the Pirate deck crew. Because, who don't like pirates with cannons?
Pirates are all good
stuff.
That's right.
So that's about all I've been doing.
Excellent.
Oh, that's plenty.
How about you, Craig?
Well, I finished all of the Retribution models I started in the last episode. So just go over those. I did Imperatus, I think is his name, or Imperatus.
Imperatus is how I've heard it pronounced.
Imperatus. Yeah. Moros is done. I did 2 Griffins. I did Alara, the Retribution Tactics Mini.
Yeah.
What? The Turbo what?
The Turbo Chamber. Whatever. She gets called all kinds of things. She's got the worst name.
Tyro of the Third Chamber, I believe. Yeah. The Fane Knight Skyrith. I don't know if I'll ever field any of these. I don't even know why I had these. They were all in a bag. But I painted them all because I was like all super gung-ho and ready to go. An Artificer, a Magister, another Mage Hunter Assassin, apparently somewhere along the line. I found an alternative sculpt, so gotta have 2 of those, I guess. And a Soulless Escort, which I wish I had had last time against Russ when I was already 10 points ahead.
Why not add 10 more points?
Why not add another point?
Just in for a penny, in for a pound.
Because he adds 5 inches to the range of any spell that you try to cast at his unit.
That's perfect.
So, see, that would have been cool.
Right.
And then I have a giant order of Reaper Bones coming in that I'm just starting on now for my Dungeons and Dragons session at Gen Con with the Geek Nation tours. I got a whole bunch of themed models that I got from the War Store. And while I was doing that, I might have accidentally pushed a couple buttons and have a whole bunch more Warmachine Hordes models coming. I may or may not. I don't know.
You are all in, my friend.
It's insane. Well, yeah, all I got to do is find more than one person I can play with.
All you need is one good friend.
Yeah. Who's not always going away on business.
Yes, well.
But anyway, that's me. What about you, Russ? What have you been doing?
You're both putting me to shame. I have had very little modeling this last couple weeks, which I'm sad about, honestly. I did prime my blazers, as I mentioned last time, but I've not gotten any brush strokes on them, which is sad. I know it's sad. What about other stuff? What about books, movies? A lot of good stuff out there in theaters. John, what have you been watching and reading and whatnot?
So I have a problem with terrible television from the past.
Uh-oh.
And Hulu is feeding my addiction so hard these days.
Uh-oh.
I am like neck deep in Johnny Sacco and his flying robot. This show must have cost dozens of dollars to make.
Right.
It is horrific. It's as bad as Japanese mecha ever got.
No.
And I'm just loving every second of it. Of course, I'm also the guy that watches Turkish Star Wars on purpose.
Ooh, well, see, there you go. So it's sort of like just, self-mutilation, really.
Well, it doesn't leave marks on the outside.
Right. That's the important thing.
I've also been doing Pokemon Go with my kids.
Yeah.
And so on my way back to the hotel from the Starbucks headquarters,
right.
I captured like 14, 15 Pokemon. It was crazy.
That's a good night. Right.
It was like, I've never, when I'm in Racine, it's like there's no Pokemon anywhere. And it's like, I'm like walking down the street. 3 of them jump out of nowhere. It's like, oh my God, I'm throwing Pokeballs all over the place. It's amazing. Just kind of wish my kids had been with me because I kind of look like a lunatic throwing Pokeballs on the street by myself.
Yes.
And then, lastly, I got this thing on Sunday night I do every week, Painting with Menoth John.
What's the address for that again?
It is, if you want to watch it live at 6:30 p.m. Central on Sunday nights, you would go to www.twitch.tv/MenothJohn. But if you are unable to make that because you're in a part of the world where 6:30 p.m. Central is stupid.
Or you're playing Pokemon, right?
Or exactly. Yeah. We suggest looking up on YouTube for Menoth John. Or if that's too hard, you can follow me on Twitter at Menoth John. And all kinds of shenanigans will be at your service. Basically, search Menoth John. Turns out it's a fairly unique name.
That's good.
And
good branding.
Something about me will come up most likely.
Excellent. So anyway, you're playing Pokemon.
Yes.
Yes.
And then watching terrible and I'm also watching terrible Japanese television, and then also doing karate with my son because he's into that now, and he's tearing it up. So that's
very cool.
Awesome.
That's my life.
Excellent. Well done.
Very nice.
Well, Craig, how about you, sir?
How about me, sir? Well, it's funny you should ask. What have I been? Well, let's start with TV. I've been watching Preacher still. Did I talk about Preacher last episode?
You did. You still enjoying it?
I did.
You did, yeah.
It's just gotten crazier and crazier, and I love it. It's really, really crazy stuff. So love that. Okay, Dark Matter versus Killjoys.
Yes.
I'm doubling down on Dark Matter.
You are? Okay.
I'm telling you, the Dark Matter storyline has skyrocketed for me this season.
Okay.
And, not to give anything away, but some of the weaker actors are no longer there and or have changed their personalities through the plot enough that they're kind of fitting in now.
Okay.
And the writing's gotten better. I still think that Killjoys has better writing.
Right.
And the Killjoy plot is not bad.
Yes.
If Killjoy and Dark Matter existed in alternate universes away from each other, I would say, I will say they're both good. I enjoy both of them.
Awesome.
But I will say that I think Dark Matter is edging up a little bit beyond Killjoys for me because of the really complex, cool storyline that they've got.
Are you enjoying both and watching both?
Yes, I am enjoying both and watching.
They're both quality sci-fi.
Indeed.
Right.
Speaking of quality sci-fi, I had a little bit of free time, so I went and saw Independence Day: Resurgence.
Was that quality?
It was neither quality nor free time. No, I liked it, which just goes to show you that you cannot trust my opinion on anything.
I liked it too.
See, there you go. Right. It's the two of us, John. Everybody else, I think of all the people who saw it, we represent the 32% who liked it.
Pretty much.
If Rotten Tomatoes is anything to go by.
You have to go in just wanting explosions and checking out your mind.
Exactly. It's fun. I mean, you could probably draw what character arcs there are within the first 5 minutes and be, oh yeah, that's the guy who's going to do this. Oh yeah, that's the guy who's going to do that. Oh yeah, that's going to happen to that guy. Oh yeah, that's going to happen to that. With a couple surprises, not in a good way. Actually, I would say the surprises are like, wow, I would have thought they at least would have done that, which would have been negative. So it's just like a feel good blow up the aliens movie.
Yeah.
So on my show, we have a way of rating movies, and we refer to it as the Shots of Kraken scale. And Kraken is a black spiced rum that's roughly 90% proof. We gave Resurgence 2 shots of Kraken because you needed a little bit of a jag on in order to fully appreciate the beauty of that movie.
I would say that's probably true. Let's see. Reading. I'm still listening to the Brandon Sanderson series, the Mistborn series. It's long. His books are all pretty long, except for his superhero stories. So I'm enjoying it. Although I am getting to that point. I get Brandon Sanderson fatigue every now and then. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting that a little bit, but I think I've only got like 20 hours to go on the last book in this trilogy, so I should be good. Still reading Terry Pratchett Discworld books. Right now I'm reading Monstrous Regiment, which I'm enjoying. It's just it's fun to watch him deal with so many different themes and so many different genres even within his fantasy world. So it's just crazy good. I have been playing Pokemon Go.
You have? I thought you were going to resist
craziness.
Wow.
I've been playing with my son.
Yes.
And trying to ignore all the negative press it's been getting.
Right.
And trying to get my wife to go email them about I want to waive all the stuff that you have to email them to waive all the stuff that you waived when you clicked on I accept your terms and conditions at the beginning. It's all kinds of weird legal craziness buried in there somewhere. But Reese loves it. And we don't play it a lot. I just turn my phone on every night. Although one time going home from my parents, they live about 30 minutes away. We put on Pokemon Go instead of the GPS and just watched the little guy run himself to death. And
he's quite athletic, really.
Now, so Reese, who can see between the seats when he's up in his seat, he's like, Daddy, a gym! Daddy, a Pokestop! Daddy, a gym! Daddy, a Pokestop! So that was fun. War Room, people who've been followed, that was very hard to get on my phone, but eventually I did. And it has a lot to do with why I just dropped dollars at the War Store. Because it's addictive. Like any good army construction software. It makes army construction as fun as playing the game. And so the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I really do need one of those. Oh, I need one of those too. So I would recommend you not look at it when you're trying to figure out what to buy.
It's like going to the grocery store when you're hungry. Just don't do that.
Exactly. Don't want to do it.
Go be shopping with War Room turned on. It's just a mistake.
And it was insane because I will tell you, I started with dollars, right? In a spreadsheet, of course, because that's how I roll. Right. And then I spent an hour of which I was supposed to be writing, going through it. I got to cut that. Oh, but then if I cut that, I can't. Okay, put that back in. I'm going to cut. Okay. I managed to, I think, remove $11 from the total.
All right. So, it doesn't show you cost of your army, does it? That'd be sort of.
What's that?
It doesn't show you cost of your army.
Oh, no, of course not.
No.
God, no.
Then it would actually probably have the reverse effect.
Right. You don't want that.
No. And in this one, I think it sends through your microphone and your phone little puffs of pheromones. I think.
What is evil about it though is you can set it so it only shows like I want to build a list from the models I own or the models I painted,
and then you can see what pathetic little collection you have. You need stuff.
It doesn't hide the ones you don't own. It just makes them red. So it's like, by the way, you could have this guy. Oh, but you don't have him. You know, it's just missing the click here to order button. Really,
you were so close to being competitive.
Right,
you were so close.
Take this dude. He's only $15. Get 2.
Come on, man.
Right. Right.
So speaking of writing, a couple episodes ago, I talked about how I hadn't been doing anything on this new book and I was feeling really guilty. I am now 85,000 words in.
Ooh,
wow.
After 3 weeks. So, once again, Maine, I don't know why, because Karen is usually very vigilant about the time I spend with her family and I'm not allowed to sneak away. But for some reason in Maine, she lets me go to Panera 4 days of that entire week, full days. So I get full days of writing without like when I'm writing here in the pub, I'm like, oh, there's the Warmachine table. Oh, there's my modeling stuff. Oh, there's that other stuff. And it's very distracting. In Panera, I have none of that. So I had a day every year. I have my best day in Panera. This year, I had one day where I wrote 10,600 words.
Wow.
In one day. Now they could all suck. They could all be really bad words.
Right,
I won't say that. But yeah, so that's going strong. Hopefully I'm sort of more than halfway done. I don't know. This is, I feel like this is a bigger book than I thought it was when I did the outline, but, it's fun. I'm enjoying it. I think it's going well. So that's good. And then I just wanted to refer back to, I made a few comments about Guild Ball last episode.
Uh-oh.
And I got an email from listener Tim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who took exception to my complaining about the balance in Guild Ball. And his point is that the models aren't balanced against each other. The teams overall are balanced, and what you have to do is you have to build a balanced list based on, the meta and what other people are taking, and you have the ability to balance out anything, which I think is true, and I will cede that point. Although I still think I don't know how you ensure that if you can't look model to model, but I will say that because of our conversation, Russ, when I was talking about the balance and we were referring to how if you were playing a timed game, things would have ended up much differently.
Right.
So I think a timed game is essential to all that. But I will also say that, I don't want anybody to think it's not a fun game and that I'm having a fun time whenever I play it. So he kind of gave me the impression from his email that he thought I might give people the impression that I didn't like it. And of course I do like it. I've painted lots of models. I'm just not going to play it anymore against the butchers without a timed game.
Well, that's just it. I think that some of the factions and some of the guilds are more overtly powerful when you with a lower learning curve. Let's say the butchers, for instance.
Right.
There are other factions, let's say the engineers, that have a relatively steep learning curve with a high level of combo interaction. They talk about it as skill cap in a lot of games. And some of those factions have insanely high skill cap. Sure, they're balanced against each other, but the amount of time that it's going to take you, especially if you're new to the game, to get to that skill cap level to be able to, compete against a team that wants to walk up and hack your head off, it takes time and effort. And do you have that time and effort to invest in it?
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds like it makes perfect sense to me.
I think that's right.
That's kind of what I was trying to say.
You need the easy button, Craig. That's what you want.
I need the butchers.
You want the easy button.
Interestingly enough, I have Joe's right here, and I've already painted them all.
Oh, there you go. See? If you can't beat them, join them. That's what I say.
Yeah. So thank you, Tim, for a very respectful and well-written email. And I do want to say again, I really enjoy Guild Ball, and it's not like I'm not going to play anymore. I'm just going to play timed games against butchers.
There you go.
All right. Russ, what about you?
I have found my favorite new show.
Uh-oh.
Have you guys seen Strange Things?
No.
Yes, my girlfriend made me watch it the other day.
Did you enjoy it?
That that television show is going to be amazing, I think, as it goes along.
Oh my God. So this is a show. So Craig, just to give you the set.
Yes, I'm listening.
It takes place in 1983.
Okay.
So imagine a show that is a cross between Twin Peaks, The Goonies, and anything ever written by Stephen King.
Okay.
Just merge all that together.
Yep.
And place it in 1983 starring Winona Ryder. That's pretty much what you've got. And it's epic. And it's even got a little bit of E.T. thrown in there because pretty much the group of kids that sort of centers it around right in the beginning, they're sitting there playing Dungeons and Dragons, just like the beginning of E.T. It's the whole, every 80s trope you can imagine is sort of stuffed into this somewhere. But the pacing, the acting, the mystery, the whole thing is just extremely well done. All these kids they found, these child actors are awesome. I don't know where they found these guys hanging out, but just a fantastic show. It's got supernatural things happening there. It's got, I don't want to spoil anything because it's pretty much the whole thing's kind of a mystery. But I'm just really, really enjoying it. I love it. It's sort of like, I remember when I first watched Twin Peaks. Now, it's better than Twin Peaks potentially because Twin Peaks had sort of a disappointing end. But this has got a much stronger storyline going. It's Netflix, so the entire series dropped, season 1. Was it 8 episodes, John? I think it was 8.
I've only watched the first.
I think it was 8. And the 8th episode does have a very satisfying end, but it's clearly set up for a second season. But even if it doesn't get a second season, and by the way, it did, even if it didn't, there's a complete story arc there that's very satisfying.
Okay. Well, first, right off the bat, you're not that much of a fan because you got the name wrong.
It's Stranger
It's
Things.
Stranger Things.
Stranger
Sorry,
Things.
I missed an R. Pardon me.
Well, that R is very important. But
Stranger
it looks
Things.
cool. I'm looking at
Yeah,
it.
I love it.
So Russ, does Winona Ryder's acting improve episode to episode?
Yes. So
Good.
I think, well, she's going for her character is really interesting. And in the beginning, I think in the very first episode, so we've been binge watching it. My kids fell in love with it too. And it's not, my youngest daughter's 12 now. So it's just the right amount of dark for them, but I wouldn't really go any younger than 10. There's some very dark parts to this. But Winona Ryder's character goes from, I don't know how to describe it, but I really like where she ends up.
Okay, I'll take your word for it and continue watching the show.
I forget where it ends in episode 1. I think in episode 1 she's kind of looking.
Wow, there's a lot of characters.
Oh, Craig. Don't
Holy
spoil this thing
crap.
for yourself. Just stop reading about it now and go watch it. It's just great. And pretty much what happened was, I don't know what happened. I guess it dropped like beginning of last week or something, because I started watching it and all of a sudden it exploded on Facebook. All my friends like, oh my God, this is the best. It was awesome. I loved every minute of it. So go watch it. Watch the whole thing. We'll talk about it later in the future.
Okay, this episode, we need to record this episode quickly, and I'll go watch the first episode.
Excellent.
Before Karen comes home.
Very good. Also saw the new Star Trek. Did you guys see that yet?
I have not.
No.
Okay. Now, I know, Craig, you are not so much of a Star Trek fan. John, are you a Star Trek guy?
I am. Go ahead, John.
No, please do.
I was going to say I'm not an anti-fan.
No, you're just a mediocre.
And I have enjoyed the new, the reboot.
Yeah, I enjoy the heck out of the reboot.
Okay, well, I think
I really like the characters. I didn't think Into Darkness was that bad.
Okay, so you will love this, I think, because I thought Into Darkness was okay, but it was my least favorite of the new ones, and this new one is amongst my favorites. So I really like it a lot. I think
Terrific.
Simon Pegg did the screenplay for this one, and I think his you can tell he loves the original characters, and it's definitely almost like a tribute. It's like a love song, each of the characters. Each one has a fantastic moment that just screams the original character in a really, really good way. I won't spoil the story, but the villain's perfect. The ending's a little bit contrived, but you just don't care.
I mean, you can't. That's sort of expected.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I mean, it's definitely got a little bit, it's got the right amount of camp, because it's the original series.
There you go. Just
right?
enough cheese to make a good hero sandwich, as my
That's
friend
right.
Russ says.
It's perfect for that. So I really like that. Playing Pokemon Go, of course, like everybody else in the known universe. What's interesting about Pokemon Go is I don't understand the hate.
Nor do I. All it is getting kids out.
I haven't seen any. Where's the define hate? What's the hate?
Well, like people just don't like I can't believe you let kids play that game. It's like, what? You mean go outside and walk? Which problem? And then it's like, I see pictures on Facebook of people posting signs like, if you leave this office to go catch a Pokemon, you'll be fired. I'm like, oh, but it's okay to leave the office to go smoke a cigarette and kill yourself. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So it just doesn't, it's not rational.
These are people who are not secure enough in who they are to be able to be a little foolish and have some fun.
Why are you attacking other people's pleasure? Like, what does that matter? It's just weird. But anyway, it's classic. It kind of reminds me of everything else nerds get teased for doing. But what's funny about this is that I think the people playing it way outnumber everybody else. So if they're not careful, they'll be confused.
Absolutely.
Anyway, also still enjoying the video game Overwatch. The new character Anna just came out.
It's a fun game.
Yeah, so if you've been playing Overwatch and you just took a break, make sure you jump back in. Anna's a really nice addition. She's very unique, and she adds a lot to the game if you don't play her because of how she supports the rest of the folks. So, and competitive play is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying that mode.
Cool.
So is that achievements?
Sounds like it.
Is achievements.
I'm achieved out.
See, I need the button to work.
That was pretty good. And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present... Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep. Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, now I'm relegating to announcing this pap. Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Hey, and welcome back for another app of the ep. This time around, I want to revisit Battlefleet Gothic Leviathan. So I think I mentioned this a couple episodes ago when it first dropped. This is the new Battlefleet Gothic game for iOS. I think it's also on Android. I'm not sure about that, but I've got the iOS version. I picked it up. I want to say it's like $5, pretty cheap money. And when I last talked about it, I got a chance to play a little bit, not a lot, but I just recently had a nice long business trip with a long flight. And so I pulled this bad boy out, and man, is it entertaining. It feels like a full-fledged tactical game. First of all, the rules and mechanics are exactly, not kind of like, not modified for, they are exactly the same as the board game, or as the original miniature game, Battlefleet Gothic, on your iOS device is fantastic. I mean, the way you roll for command orders, all the orders are the same. The way you roll for not shooting the same target, the closest target, the way ships move, the way shields work, everything. It's awesome. Now, when I last talked about this, I'd only played a few of the tutorial missions. I was really impressed with the implementation, the graphics, the audio, all that stuff. But now I've got a chance to get past. There's quite a few tutorial missions you can play. Now, you don't have to play them all to jump right into the campaign, but, I kind of like to, so I played through all of them. Each tutorial you complete gives you another command reroll in the main game, in the campaign. So if you remember in Battlefleet Gothic, and you could buy rerolls in the original game, when you make a command check, you could fail, and you could spend a reroll to remake the command check at a critical point. That's available here in the app as well, but the more tutorials you complete, the more of those you get. And in addition to that, once you get past all the Imperial tutorials, you can start taking tutorials for the other factions, including the Space Marines, the Tyranids, and all that stuff. But now I'm playing the campaign, and I was expecting the campaign mode to be very tacked on, but no, it's actually great. It's very in-depth. The campaign mode itself is a game in and of itself where you're moving your squadrons around. It's like some of the early miniature game campaigns in a very good way. In other words, you move these little markers around the solar system or the system, I guess, from planet to planet. And these represent a point value of your fleet. And when you lose a battle, and then, of course, when these things meet, you fight. And when you fight, for example, the Tyranids, if you lose, your fleet becomes that percentage smaller. So you can have asymmetric battles where you don't have enough points in the game to win. It's really interesting. Very old school campaign system. I'm really, really enjoying this. So, check it out. Battlefleet Gothic Leviathan. Great deal on iOS. Very, very tactical campaign mode, and also fantastic right out of Battlefleet Gothic. I mean, the way the ordnance works is, so sweet. Anyway, check it out. If you haven't already, Battlefleet Gothic Leviathan. It's a no-brainer. Pick it up for any Battlefleet Gothic fan. Oh, and by the way, since it is Gen Con week when this comes out, I just want to throw out an etiquette idea here for Pokemon Go at Gen Con, because I myself, as I mentioned before, big Pokemon fan. My whole family's really excited about catching all the Pokemons out there in Gen Con. Just a little etiquette, though. Those lanes in the dealer hall, they get kind of crowded. Can we all just agree, maybe not to be playing Pokemon looking at our phone while we're walking around the dealer hall? Can we not do that? How does that sound? All right, thanks, everybody. Hope to see a lot of you there at Gen Con, and hope you're going to see you at our D6G Play by Mob event this coming Thursday at 9 p.m. And that's it for another App of the Ep. Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the Ep, a segment in which, hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show. Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class. Hey, welcome back. And since we have the internationally renowned Menoth John on the show today, I think it would be inappropriate if we didn't take advantage of the president of Warmachine Hordes being on the show to discuss some painting tips. We've done painting stuff in the past, Craig.
Yes, but we've never had someone like John on.
Well, that's true, A. And B, we haven't really updated our painting tips in what's probably over 6 years. And I'm just thinking people might want to hear from us on, are we still doing the same thing? Are we still using the same paints or the new techniques? And also, of course, get a third opinion here from our friend Menoth John. Now, John, we should probably take a moment here to get to know you a little better here on the show. And so as you may know, we have to ask everyone on the show, the first time they're on the show, the somewhat obvious question, but still deeply important. Are you now, or have you ever been, a gamer?
As a matter of fact, I am a gamer. My primary, like you said, there wasn't going to be any takebacks.
No,
here we go. I screwed up within the first 30 seconds.
It's okay. It's okay. Just have another drink and keep moving.
my my primary poison is Warmachine Hordes.
Mm-hmm.
I got started in gaming. It depends on what part of my life you look at. When I was a kid, my grandmother was very influential, and we played games like Sorry and Monopoly and stuff like that. And then I went through a very long phase until I was in high school, and I discovered this thing called Car Wars.
Ooh, good choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and Car Wars pulled me through college and stuff like that because, actually, I'm a better driver in the wintertime because of that. Because, realizing that you're having a D4 on your handling class as a result of attempting to turn on ice is very important is a life lesson.
Right.
So moved on from Car Wars and then went through a really long stretch until these guys started a podcast called the D6 Generation.
Oh,
they
really?
sound like losers.
They do sound. I mean, how did you even bear those early episodes? I heard they were terrible.
The 2-part episodes were my favorites. No. I used to cut my grass to you guys, and we would talk occasionally about this game called Warmachine. And I had a change of career. I moved from working for General Mills, and I moved over to Multimeal, and that brought me to the state of Utah. And there was a local game store there, and I went in and said, well, what's nobody playing? And they said, Menoth. And I said, well, ain't that convenient? And so I picked that up, and that's kind of where it all started. And kind of moved forward in playing that game. And Chris Miller, who is known for the Lost Hemisphere, at that time it was just the website, and I got together, and we were guests on a podcast called Guts and Gears.
Yes. Yep.
And Chris and I decided after that, it's like, well, why don't we do this? I mean,
anybody can do this. I mean, if those guys in the D6G can do it, pretty much anyone.
Very true. It's actually very true.
It is. Awesome. So you started what? So when did you start about?
We started that podcast back in 2010.
Wow. Okay.
And one thing led to another, and eventually I left that show after about 24 episodes. And then it came about 4 years ago. It was New Year's Eve. And this is going to come as a huge shock to anyone that knows me, but I couldn't get a date, and decided that I was probably not the only nerd out there who enjoyed painting who also had relationship issues. And so I decided to stream on Ustream for the first time, and got so attached to it that I decided, I could probably do this on a weekly basis, and Painting with Menoth John was invented that evening.
Nice. And so this was just you... so this first episode, this wasn't like you sitting around thinking, I have this great new concept for a video podcast. It was more just like, it's New Year's Eve, I'm bored, I want to drink and paint models, and I might as well show the world what I'm doing right now.
Exactly. I have this great big judicator that needs to get painted.
Right.
I might as well get it done some way. And by God, like a half a dozen or more people tuned in on that very first episode. And I was
now
like,
this first time, there was no one else on the show with you, right?
No, it was just me, this really crummy, they make these webcams that are like on a stick, kind of. Yeah. They're for doing presentation work. Right. I had one of those things that I used to use to do homework with my son over the internet sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I used that thing, and the resolution literally could not have been more terrible. Right. And I'd also patched in my iPad so that I could I could have something on if I ever wanted to bring guests on and stuff. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, it was the cheesiest setup in history, but it got me started, and it taught me the ropes of how to do podcasting. And, at the time in the Warmachine Hordes community is very blessed with a lot of podcasting content. Mm-hmm. But what wasn't filled at the time was very much hobby content.
Right.
So I decided, well, I'm not a great painter, still not a great painter. But nobody else is doing it, and maybe I can get better. And if there are some really new painters, maybe I can help bring them along. And that's sort of the concept behind my show and what I like to do. I'm not, like I said, I mean, Craig, you're a much better painter than I am.
Oh, and I don't know about that.
I don't know. And there are many painters out there who are much, much better painters than I am. But, with the kinds of things that we're going to talk on tonight's show about, what I like to do is I want to build community through the hobby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, and we can talk about a lot of stuff. We'll give out some sweet tips and all that kind of stuff. But I think the overarching message that I have to anybody out there who is a bit intimidated by painting is that, you have to try. And if you listen to these few things that we're going to talk about tonight, we can probably get you, 60, 70% of the way to being a really pretty decent painter. The rest is practice.
That's right. And most of its techniques, and I think that's the interesting thing about it, is that people get so intimidated by it. Yeah. And it really is such an enjoyable, Craig and I have talked about this before, it's a very cathartic feeling to paint, at least for me. It's just sort of relaxing. Your mind kind of goes into the zone where it's one of the few things you can do and you just forget about work and all your worries and you're just like, this shade of blue is looking great. I think I want to go on up and highlight, kind of thing. And it's like, you don't even really worry about anything for a while and just kind of zone out. And that's the magic of it. And then also you can share your work with others, and people feel like others are critical of it. And sure, if you're going to submit your work to like some big painting contest, and of course everybody's hypercritical of it, but anybody wants to see any kind of paint job on the table more than they want to see metal, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
It doesn't matter what you could have just painted it all one color. It looks better than metal. And and I'm not trying to pick on people to do that. It's just it doesn't really take a lot of effort to make your army look great on the table, And then you'll be surprised about a few tricks you can do to make your army look fantastic on the table. And it's it's such a community effort to paint and stuff. I just love the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's less than 5 different techniques that if you can nail those and get decent at them, you will make a really excellent looking army from that 3-foot distance. That's really, really important. And we're going to touch on some of those later on.
Well, let's start at the beginning, John, because I think what first intimidates people is, I got to spend hundreds of dollars on the right equipment to be able to even paint, right? So they get their starter box, they get, their little battle box for Warmachine or their starter box for whatever their favorite miniature game is. And now they realize, oh God, I got to go buy paints and I got to go buy brushes, and I spend, $100 on a really amazing brush set, and then do I got to buy the entire line of, Games Workshop paints for $500? I mean, what do you tell people the minimum to start is to just get started nowadays?
To get started, all you really need to do is let's take Privateer for example. P3 paint line is a really high class paint line. It's a set of paints that works really good for beginners, but also is formulated to be able to do some really crazy high-level advanced techniques like two-brush blending and stuff like that. So what you really need to do is you need a good primer, and for anybody out there who has been told that you don't need to prime your models, you must prime your models.
Yes.
Or else the paint just comes off.
Yes.
And the idea is for paint to stay on the model for it to look optimal. And you need to have, you can start with some more, shall we say, pedestrian paintbrushes. Like you might go to a Michaels or a Hobby Lobby, let's say, and get some of the basic paintbrushes. But when you start getting a little bit more into it, the paintbrush is probably the number one thing you can do to up your game in painting. And you don't need to go out and buy, a set of 10 paintbrushes. You need like a size 0, a size 1, and a size 2. Yep. And that's really all you need. And we'll get, I don't know, I think, as I look at the bullet points, as I get the look behind the curtain, if you will, we're going to talk a little bit more about what are some of my favorite brushes, what are some of your favorite brushes, and things like that. But good primer, and we'll talk about brands and stuff like that as well. You need some decent brushes, and then get a starter set of paints from somebody like Privateer. If you have a faction that you are interested in, a lot of times they're going to be able to sell you a small box of paints. There's a half a dozen pots in there that will get you started. And what you'll notice is that you'll start looking at, wow, geez, I wish I had a little bit different brown for this. Oh, they've got a paint for that.
Right.
And you'll very slowly build up your paints. I probably am sitting in front of 60 paints. And that's awesome. I've also been doing this since 2008.
Right.
So that's something. You look at some of these really high-end painters, and they've got like these setups with like 200 different paints. I'm looking at it, I'm going, what do you do with this?
Yeah, but even for them, I find like, I don't know if this is what happens to you guys, but I find that I have pretty much the full line of Privateer Press paints by now. And yeah. I agree with your assessment. I like P3, but we'll get into the details of which paints we like more. But one thing to remember is, even when you have a large set like that, when you choose a particular army to paint, you don't use that many colors typically for that particular army. Like I'll end up taking out of my paint rack I'll have the 6 or 7 colors that I'm really using on this. You know, when I was painting my Gar, for example, which are all reds and beiges, I'll have the red highlight color, the beige highlight color, black, white, a couple. So maybe there's 6 or 7 colors, and that's it. And one of the reasons you do that is because A, we're all lazy, and B, though, you want to be able to remember the colors as you come back to these guys so that they don't, you're not painting.
I would recommend you got to write it down. I
do. I take a picture. Now what I do is, since camera, we've been doing this before camera phones are around, but now what I do is I take a picture of one of my prototype models with a particular thing and put the paint colors behind them with the labels facing the camera. Snap it, and then I've got that for next time when I go back and look at what did I use for my Gar again? Oh yeah,
how clever!
That's super smart.
So that's a trick I always do, and plus I always get in the other thing. The reason I do that is partly because I'm on a podcast, and what happens is I'll tweet the pictures of new models I work on, and people are like, "Oh, what shade did you use?" And if I take that picture and put that on Twitter, the names are right there. But so don't feel like, so the reason I tell that story is because honest to God, you don't need more than like 10 paints really for once you pick a color palette for that particular army. And yes, choosing color palettes, there's combinations that look a little funny and stuff. But to John's point, if you're picking a army that has the full line of paints, like a Battlefront has paint kits that match certain factions, the Germans and the Americans and everything. You got, of course, Games Workshop's got a million paint packages. Privateer's got those. If you pick one of those that match, now you're good to go. You got your palette figured out. You don't have to worry about, which shade of blue to pick for your Signar or whatever.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about, so we definitely, you need a, sorry, go ahead, John.
One last thing I want to say before we get off this subject. This is a warning. Do not buy craft paints.
Oh, yes. No. Do not.
Craft paints are not for miniatures. The pigments that they use for craft paints are awesome for like painting signs and stuff like that. Where miniatures, you want to have paints that have pigments that flow better and are thinner. And craft paints, unfortunately, kind of violate both of those things. They have really chunky pigments and they are very thick. Thick you can kind of fix with dilution, and we'll get to that later. But craft paints are so far off the map that you really don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think the 3 things to remember, and we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here, but the 3 things to remember are you need a good primer, you need a good pick paints that are designed for painting models, and get those 1 or 2 brushes that are really the right size for painting models. Those Absolutely. 3 things you get right, everything else is gravy, pretty much, I think.
I agree.
But let's talk a bit about assembly, because this can be intimidating too, right? So let's kind of walk through the order of how we start working on a model and what we use as we go through this stuff. So the first thing that happens to you, right, especially if you're new miniature gamers, you open up this box and all these parts come out and you're like, wait, I don't have to just paint these things. I got to put them together, right? And that can be intimidating in and of itself, right? Especially depending on which manufacturer you get it from. Sometimes you'll hear Craig and I, and sometimes, John, I've heard it you say it on your show too, where this particular manufacturer, the models look amazing, but assembly is really challenging because they got a little tiny fiddly bits and they're all metal. Or this other manufacturer's like, holy mackerel, everything pretty much was pre-slotted. It went right together. There was no flashing. Boom, I'm ready to rock. I did very little besides a dab of glue. So there is a lot of that. But what things do you recommend being in your tool chest from day one to help get those models built together? And by the way, don't rush assembly and priming is another thing I would say. Spend a little time here. It'll pay dividends later. I don't know, Craig, how you feel about that.
Right.
So what do you think, John? What do you make sure you have on your workbench when you start to put together some models?
Well, when I put models together, there's a couple of things that we're going to talk about at some point. I'm going to make Craig's head explode here in a little while.
Awesome.
So you need to take into a large account what is the material that the model that you're about to assemble. What is it made out of? There's metal models. There's plastic, which would be you describe as like a polystyrene, which would be your GW style kits. You've got this plastic that Privateer uses, which is affectionately known as Restic, which is a very challenging material to work with from a plastic standpoint. Then you've got resin, and they all have different kind of tricks of the trade. So for metal, and there's not as many metal kits out there as there used to be, simply because the price of metal has become so off the charts as far as expense, and they want to make, who wants to pay $120 for a small unit of cavalry? And so what I used to do with metal is when I had my 10-year anniversary working for General Mills, I was given a Dremel, and I use a Dremel rotary tool on metal to get mold lines off, and I use a stainless steel brush in it. And what that allows me to do...
You're not messing around.
No. I get to use power tools, which is always super legit and totally sweet. and it cleans the mold lines off without really doing a whole lot of damage to the detail, because you can, once you get kind of the trick of holding them, you can control the amount of pressure. You don't want to go crazy, go nuts, because you just erase the metal.
Right.
But it's a nice compromise. Also, pro tip when you're using the rotary tool, use safety glasses, because the little parts of the brush will fly off and they will hit you, and you don't want that going in your eye, because that's no point.
No, that'd rough up your night.
Exactly. So rotary tools are cool, but I would say that's a next level kind of a thing. A really good set of diamond files.
Files, right.
Is really, really, really critical and important. I don't care what material you're working with.
Well, the nice thing about good files is you can, I love the rotary tool idea, and I think I'll try that myself. I do have a Dremel for doing like advanced cutting and pinning and things, but I've never tried it for fine line work. That sounds like an awesome idea, especially if you got a lot of models to work on. But I think,
especially for metal.
Yes, but but files are essential for any material you're working with, because there's always a few mold lines here and there, and depending on the quality of the model, sometimes there's kind of big chunks of plastic and gaps and things if they really didn't do a good job of casting it. And so a file can help you out on plastic or metal. It's just the amount of pressure you put on there to get the stuff off without doing any damage to the model. So definitely a good set of files is a must. I agree with you there.
Right, and with resin, sometimes that rotary tool can be super great for that too, but always wear a dust mask, because it turns out resin is super poisonous.
Yeah, don't breathe that in.
Super poisonous.
Yes.
And if you inhale it, and you're like an idiot like I was one time, you start feeling ill for the next 2 days.
Yes.
So don't do that to yourself.
Don't do that.
That's a not tip, but the files are super critical. A new tool that I've just come upon for working with some of the softer materials like plastics, resins, and rustics is a brass brush. And I get these things from Harbor Freight Tools, and they're really cheap, like everything at Harbor Freight Tools. And what I use it for is I'll go over on plastics and stuff like that. If I want to kind of buff out a mold line, it's just stiff enough that it will take the mold line out, but it won't ruin the plastics.
Ooh, that's a good tip. I'm gonna try that.
That's another one that I use.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I have two different size diamond files. I've got little tiny ones for fine details, and then I have a set of Games and Gears really large ones that I was given by those fellas to try, and they are actually really nice. They've got a lot of heft to them and stuff, so they're a little bit harder to get into tight spots, but they do a nice job of pulling those mold lines out of hard to reach places.
Great. Those are all awesome tips. I would just add some. You definitely want to have an X-Acto knife lying about.
Yes.
And I like the sort of the classic one that testers used to put out, just a really fine tip on the end of that's sharp. And the other thing you definitely want to have is a nice pair of clippers. Because the nice pair of clippers, especially, and there actually are hobby clippers, but you can also go to the hardware store and find the exact same ones for like $5 cheaper. But the important part about the clippers is you want to make sure they have that sort of flat edge, so you can get a nice tight clip. Because usually what ends up happening is you get pieces of resin, sometimes even metal or plastic, that have a big tab on them from the casting mold, and the clippers just take it off nice and quick without having to spend a lot of time on it. Then a quick file on top of that, and you're ready to go. So that plus some files, and I think you have the basic stuff to get your model cleaned up, and you're ready to start gluing, right?
Absolutely. I think that's right. You know, a lot of people will also talk about cleaning their models before assembly as well. So along with that whole, we're talking about how to prep a model before you actually assemble it.
Right.
The Simple Green product is really, really good for washing parts before you assemble them as well, because plastics and metals especially, and resins also have this as well. They will have a mold release that they will spray on the inside of the molds. That it's, as it turns out, if it makes your model come out of a mold easier, it also makes glue harder for it to stick.
Glue and primer.
Paint.
Yeah.
Yep.
Here's a tip: if you prime your model and you find that the primer is sort of like washing the model and metal seeing through on the higher lights, and it's kind of like the primer's almost running off the model, you needed to wash it first.
You may have mold release.
You may have mold release stuff, right?
So yeah, that's the last step before you really are getting ready to go into the assembly process, which can be challenging. I don't pin. I've never pinned. Mm-hmm. I have 4 full factions of Warmachine models, and not a single one of them has a pin in them. And the reason I do that is because I'm lazy, and I never got into the habit of doing it. I use the green stuff glue method, which you guys have talked about on your show, and where you take a tiny little ball of green stuff, and you put a little bit of glue on whatever the part is. You put the part on the ball of green stuff, and then you put a little bit more glue on it, and then you put them together, and it does a marvelous job of holding things in place. And I've found that it does a really good job of making a very strong bond between the two pieces as well. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I love that technique, and I use it quite a bit. The only time I do pinning, there are a few times when I found it doesn't work, and it usually is because something has broken or was miscast a little bit. So, for example, my Thunderhead, right? So I have a Thunderhead Warjack, and now this is, for those who know Warmachine well, Thunderhead is a giant, very large character jack. He's runs on electricity, blah, blah, blah. But the thing about him is he was they just came out with the new plastic version, but he was all metal and extremely top-heavy. And the slots, the one I got was a little miscast, and so the slot where his leg goes into sort of his hip joint wouldn't fit in there. And I did try the green stuff glue trick, but what happened was because there was literally no way to get any kind of lip on that, he was just too heavy and kept popping out. So in that case, I pin it. And then I know Craig has done this before too. Sometimes you have a model with a long spear or maybe a sword blade breaks or something. There really is no other way sort of pinning to get those things back together again. Craig, I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, I agree 100%. I love the green stuff and the glue, and I would say 95% of the joins I do is with that. Like Russ says, if there's a miscast or something that's not quite right, it will make that a little more difficult. But the other thing that I find that where that doesn't really work for me is usually if I'm doing like legs on warjacks. Something where there's a lot of weight involved that is all dependent on all of the pieces being sort of solid all at the same time. I will invariably forget that this doesn't work and try to use the green stuff, and everything will slowly start to shift on me, and I'll get really annoyed. And then I'll remember that I have to scrape all the green stuff off now and pin, which happened last week when I was putting together my Imperatus and my Moros jacks. Neither of them really went together very well. No.
Myrmidons are a pain.
Yeah,
they are. They make you land the cod piece in both legs simultaneously, and then hope that the thing sticks together. Right. If you're using green stuff glue, that's a really good example.
Exactly. Yeah. And I found, and I tried it twice with each one before I resorted to pinning. But for the most part, and then to go with Russ's point of a broken weapon, I'll use 2 different examples. Both of them are Arena Rex. I had one model that the spear was just so ridiculously thin that there was no way that spear was never going to be straight. Ever in a million years. And so I just took a paper clip and straightened out the paper clip and got a really nice, very, very, very small pin drill. And I cut the spear off on either side of each hand. She's holding it in 2 hands. And then I just drilled a hole through both hands, slid the paper clip in there, and then took the spearhead off, drilled a hole in the base of the spearhead, put that in there. Looks beautiful. You would never know it was a paper clip, and it's never going to sag now because it's metal.
You're my hero. That's incredible. Drilling through those little tiny hands is so hard.
It was a pain in the butt. And then to give an example where that didn't really work, I was doing Urkek, this big giant Egyptian, looks like a sumo wrestler with a huge, ridiculously shaped fan-like battle axe. And that was, again, completely hopelessly warped. Warm it up and straighten it out didn't work because the fan was just so big that it just kept sagging down again. And then and he's holding it with 2 hands also. The butt of the spear that was sticking out the offhand snapped off, and the axe blade snapped off. So it looked like he was holding this this piece of rod, and that's all he had. So
threatening rod, though.
It was very well. He's a big guy anyway.
That's all he needs.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I drilled a hole. I knew that I was never going to get a pin into the shaft of the spear because it was just not big enough. So So I took the shaft of the spear, figured out how big that was, and drilled a hole in his hand that the shaft of the spear would fit in, and jammed it right in there, and that worked perfectly. Yeah. I tried to do the same thing with the axe, and this is why it's so dangerous and difficult to do. The drill just slid just a little bit as I was drilling, and then I drilled right off his fingers off.
Yeah.
So then there was really no hope. Luckily, it was like tucked into his body, the side of the hand that I mangled, and I just had to do a bit of green stuff in there and shove the axe blade in. And now, unless you lift him up and you look at him from the bottom at exactly the right angle, he looks fine. If you do all that, then you're going to see this little blob of green stuff that's painted fleshy to kind of make it blend in. But if you like on the tabletop, it looks fine. But yeah, pinning those little elements is very difficult.
He's totally a Colosseum gladiator guy. Yeah. He's just gotten cut in the hands. That's all it's at.
See, there you go. Absolutely. Yeah, there you go.
So just to quickly define terms for our listeners, pinning is the idea here is that there is a tool called a pin vise, which you can find at most hobby stores. And what this really is it looks like a small screwdriver, and you can then there are small drill bits that go into it, and you can basically just twist it with your hand, and it'll drill through pretty effectively. Even it's not powered, but you can make small drilled holes in your models. And the reason it's called pinning is because you'll take a small bit of metal rod, right, and make a pin out of it. And you can go to most craft stores and get florist's wire in different gauges if you'd like to use as your pins, or you can use paperclip bits too if it's big enough, and pin things that way. So that's what when we say pinning. That's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Craig, if you haven't played with Imperatus yet, you are in for a treat.
I did, sadly, but he spent the whole time getting knocked down.
Oh dear.
I'm very sorry that Russ did that to you.
I deserved it. He was 10 points down.
But it's a fun Jack. You're going to enjoy it.
Oh, I can't wait.
So, but here's the thing. I know that all of that sounded very intimidating, but here's the good news. If you work with plastics, you can really avoid all that pinning and stuff because generally speaking, plastics go together very easily. And if you use a particular kind of glue called polystyrene cement, you kind of get that whole green stuff glue, green stuff trick because what polystyrene cement does is the downside of polystyrene cement is it smells. Do not sniff it. And also it only works on true plastics, right? So these are like, if you built plastic models as a kid, like airplanes and tanks and stuff, that's what this stuff was made out of. So the good news is the privateer press, the new kits, right, are all plastics, right, John?
Well, some. There's some Convergence of Cirrus models. The transfinite emergence projector. Mm-hmm. And some of the prime conflux and
but the
some
main
of the,
four,
the
right? The four factions in both. Well, I mean the starter boxes though. The starter boxes are all plastic.
Those are Restic.
Oh, they are. So the polyester don't work on them.
Plastic as before. Yeah.
Okay. So you have to use regular glue on those, but a lot of ranges, and this is why I think it's a lot of the ranges do work in true plastics for their starter sets. Is that it's much easier to assemble plastics. But even the Restic stuff, because it's lighter, you can generally get away without any kind of pinning or green stuff also. So
absolutely, because the piece, I mean, it literally will, with regular super glue, it will set into place where it doesn't have so much weight on it within 5-10 seconds of blowing on it. Whereas metal, if you can blow on that stuff for 30 seconds and then take your hand away, and unless you've got the nerves of steel, you'll shake it with your hand shaking to pieces on you. So it's the Restic is most certainly better. They are slowly moving towards the same kind of plastics that GW has tended to in the past, where you would use that polystyrene cement. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Because that stuff has such good detail. Because of the way that the injection molding works. Mm-hmm. I'm really looking forward to it.
You get great detail, very little flashing, and you can use polystyrene cement, which is awesome because as soon as you glue polystyrene, you immediately get stickiness, and it stays malleable for a little bit, so you can kind of move those arms or legs exactly where you want, especially pose a model, and then usually within 30 seconds it's rock solid, and finally it bonds at a chemical level with the polystyrene, so you actually will break other parts of the plastic before you break the bond. So it's really the ultimate way to glue things together. So true plastics like that, I think, are probably my favorite models to work with. Craig, how do you feel about that?
It definitely makes it easier.
Yeah.
Good resin is good. I like good resin, but plastic, having started out with the GW models way back in the days of not fully posable models, and to convert your models, you had to cut them and add green stuff, and because I started all the way back then. I think I really I feel most at home with the plastics. Mm-hmm. Because it makes it easier to kind of, even if it's just a minor little detail, to sort of adjust every model so it's sort of got your own spin on it.
Yep.
And it's harder to do that with resin and infinitely harder to do that with metal. It's possible to do it with all of them, but it's the easiest to put together. And I have the most fun putting together plastics because even if you're not going to do a lot of conversion, they go together, boom, 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 because of the glue. You're on to the next guy, boom, 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 and they're going to go together very quickly. They're going to be what you want them to be. Like right there at the moment that you're working on them. So I would say that I get the most sort of sheer enjoyment out of working with those plastics.
Right.
One thing we also need to define as far as a term that we've been using, quite a bit here, and that's green stuff.
Yes.
And green stuff is an epoxy putty it's a 2-part epoxy that is a solid putty. And one side of it tends to be yellow, and the other side tends to be blue. And when you mix, what you do is you cut off a small amount of it, and then you mix it in your hands. And as you mix it, you know that you've got it fully mixed when it turns green. Therefore, green stuff. Mm-hmm. And it'll stay good for. God, what's your guys' experience? Usually I like to use mine within about 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say 20 minutes on the outside. It starts to get a little stiff after 15 minutes.
Yeah,
but you can work it. You can work it and soften it up again, and I do that a lot because I almost always make too much, and then it's one of those things where Karen doesn't often understand. Like she'll ask me to do something, I'll be like, okay, I got to finish this first, and she's like, why can you just do this now so I can do something else? And you're like, oh, I can't, or this little green ball will go to waste. So you run and do that stuff and then work it in.
Funny thing you mentioned that is I actually save my old green stuff, I pull into a ball. And I have a ball labeled 2015 on my paint desk, which represents every bit of unused green stuff I used in that year.
That's very clever.
That's awesome.
And now I've got my 2016 ball right next to it.
There you go.
Very cool.
I need to do that. That's a little more organized than I generally am, though.
Or sick in the head, one of the two.
Well, it can be both.
Why not both?
So the green stuff's just a putty that you work with. You get it into, you can fill in gaps with it. You can use it to stick parts together with a little bit of super glue added in there. And then after about 20 or 30 minutes, it starts to firm up. And after an overnight session, this stuff is rock solid. So and it's great. And also now sculptures, a lot of folks use it to actually sculpt. So if you've got some skills, you could sort of make a cloak out of green stuff, put it on the back of your guy, maybe attack it with a little tool, and you can all of a sudden make it look like a fur cloak or something. If you really are, if you've got that sort of eye for that sort of thing. I do not. I only use green stuff pretty much to fill in gaps and attach stuff. But I know folks can. I know, Craig, you've played around a little bit with some sculpting of that stuff and everything too. But
I at one point when I was in the depths of my Space Wolf army for Adepticon team tournament, I was doing a lot of I would make molds. Get a piece of plastic that I wanted to make a lot of, and I would make a mold out of that. And then it's hard and never really came out great, but it was neat to play with.
So I know we made assembly sound like there's a lot to do, but really in most cases you can get away with a little bit of cleaning, a little bit of filing, some super glue, and you're pretty much done, right?
Yeah.
In most cases. Now, before we get to painting and brushes, we got to prime our model. We talked about the priming process, but I think the only thing left to say on priming is generally use spray primer. And here's where Craig and I differ a little bit. I say splurge and get an honest-to-God miniature primer. My particular favorite is P3. I find with P3, I can spray the model as deep as I want and make sure every nook and cranny is covered, and yet I never accidentally fill in the gaps. the primer always somehow manages to dry and all the details still exposed.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Craig, you find that just some.
Well, I've used like the $3 or $4 spray paint from Walmart or Target, and I have had very good results from that. Without it, it doesn't blur any of the detail for me. But most recently, I've had 2 or 3 cans in a row where it didn't work at all. So I have been on the lookout for P3 primer locally, and I found out the hard way that there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 game stores within a half hour of me now, which seems excessive. None of them have P3 primer.
Adler carries it. I buy it there quite a bit.
Adler had none. He had white.
It may have been the day before. I may have bought them out. Basically, whenever I see P3 primer, I buy them all.
That may be why I can't find any.
The problem with P3 primer is that it is pricey. So, and this isn't just P3. So all the primers from miniature paint people like Army Painter and P3 and Games Workshop and others are all about $10 a can, which is pricey compared to like the $2 or $3 a can you can get at Walmart or for Rust-Oleum or something or at Home Depot. Right. But you can certainly make those work, but I found you got to stand a little farther back, and you got to make sure you don't overload the area or your paint will just blob up and you'll have a covered face of a blob. But John, what do you like to use for primer?
So I started off exactly in the same place you're at, Russ. I'm a fan of the P3, of the rattle can primers that are out there. I think P3 is probably the best you can do. I have used Krylon as a primer. Been real successful with Krylon, but I would say I haven't used it in probably 2 years, maybe 3. So I bought an airbrush.
You've now kicked it up a notch.
Airbrushes are super legit and totally sweet, and they're intimidating as hell.
They are. I'm scared to try them, and I want to because I hear all these stories from people like you how awesome they are, and I'm like, this is scary, crazy stuff.
But Russ, I'm here to tell you, you should not fear the airbrush. Okay, airbrushes are not to be feared; they're to be
Don't
embraced.
Fear the airbrush.
I must become one with the airbrush.
There's a whole song in there.
We need some cowbell or something going on.
There it is. I hear it.
That's as close to as this budget show gets to a cowbell.
That was basically a cosmetics brush banging on the side of a bunch of files from Games and Gears. So you should embrace this. And there is a company called Badger Airbrush, and they make airbrushes, and they also make a line of primers called Stylorens. Stylorez. It's the most ridiculously hard. Stynylrez. Stylorez.
Yep.
That is amazing. With an airbrush, you load it in an airbrush. You can use it one of two ways. You can airbrush it, where you put your nitrile glove on and you airbrush, and you can hold the model and you get into all the nooks and crannies, and it never covers up the details, and it's really great to paint on. You can also apply it with a brush. And you don't have to be real picky about when you put it on. It is thin. It's a primer. And you can put it on with a good size, like a 2 or 3 or 4, number 4 brush. And it works well that way. But my favorite way to do it is with an airbrush. I've also used the Vallejo surface primer, which is, I would say, just a tiny little bit below the Badger airbrush, but way more available in different places because it's Vallejo. And it's really, really good too. So if you're going to go with a rattle can, highly recommend what you said, Russ. The P3, top of the line. If you have an airbrush or are considering to go with an airbrush primer is really great to work with, and I highly recommend it.
See, you know what's happening to me is I have not started working on my Colossal because every time I look at it, it's assembled, but every time I look at it, I hear airbrush.
You should hear airbrush.
Because I'm like, I just know this is going to be covered in brush strokes, but an airbrush solves all those problems, and I just want to do it. But I'm so intimidated by the airbrush, and I've gone to Badger classes, and I've sat there, and I've been all excited to go do it, and then I get there, and it just intimidates me. It's like I don't know.
Let me push you over the rock and roll edge, Ross. Remember how I said my podcast, Painting with Menoth John, because I can't say that enough during the course.
So you should say it very often. If I were you, I would.
Painting with Menoth John.
Yes.
See Sunday nights on twitch.tv.
No, wait. What time is that show on again?
That show starts at 6:30 p.m. Central for the pre-ramble, in case you want that look behind the scenes.
Extra little bit, right.
shenanigans break loose at 7 p.m. Central.
Excellent.
Every
that's
Sunday
on Twitch. That's on Twitch TV, you said.
Twitch.tv/Menoth John.
Okay, good.
Basically, if you type Menoth John into a Google search, just all my stuff shows up because nobody else has a silly name like mine. But what I was saying is that show was born because I was brush painting a colossal. That brush painting that colossal took me 2 months.
See, that's now. What would you say it would take with an airbrush?
I painted my Glacier King in.
Oh, I saw pictures of that, by the way. That looks amazing. Your Facebook event.
15 hours.
What?
Wow.
15 hours. That takes me that long to paint a Gretchen.
So here's why it's a big deal. Yeah. So of that 15 hours, a Glacier King is when you look at the model, it's essentially this big body, and then it's got this rock stuff all over the place. So when you use an airbrush, because the area is so large, you can paint a ridiculous amount of square inches very, very quickly. And the thing about especially things like gargantuans, which are organic models, they're animals, so to speak. They have some natural variation. So this airbrush gives you the ability to create these natural blendings between the colors that you would normally see in the wild, but you can paint them like stupid fast. I was done with airbrushing on this gargantuan, I would say in 25 minutes.
Oh my God! See, oh God. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna go buy an airbrush. That's my new plan.
So you come to? Are you going to? Are you going to Adepticon next year?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So if you can hold off.
Okay.
Badger has stupid deals.
They do. I almost bought one last year. I should have bought one last year. All right, John, you've convinced me now that this is the way to go. All right. Are you going to Adepticon next year? Are you going to Adepticon next year?
Adepticon is about 40 minutes from my house.
So that's a yes. Okay, good.
So I usually drive down for at least a day.
All right, sweet. Well, we should get together and you could give me airbrush lessons.
There you go.
This is
my pleasure.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Oh, I'd love to do that. All right, cool. Well, that's fantastic. So that's good.
Done.
There we go. So that's priming. Basically, you hit it with a spray can for us intro folks like that. And if you're a pro like John, you use an airbrush. So
I'm sorry.
Now when it's time to paint, what do we do for brush styles? And what you mentioned a little bit earlier that this is a place you should not skimp. I would agree with you on that. There's nothing worse than getting a cheap brush and the bristles start to sort of come out of the brush while you're painting, or
it will very much impact your ability to paint the model.
You will be surprised how much and you won't even realize it until someone actually gives you a real brush. You're like, oh my, how did I even do this before? So definitely splurge there.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of people that I've recommended some different brushes to, and so here's the other pro tip is if you buy a good brush, it lasts.
It does. Yeah.
And if you buy a good brush and you take care of it, it lasts forever. I've got some Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes that I've had probably I've been painting for about 8 years now. These are probably 5 years old, and I'm still using them.
Wow.
Yeah, you can totally do that. You got to get good cleaner, and then you just keep them clean and keep them, clean them every time you use them. But having that good brush is the key. You can't get a cheap brush.
Yep.
And those Winsor Newtons are not cheap. They're like $30 a brush, maybe $25 if you find a deal someplace.
Yeah, you can get them you can get them at a better deal than that, but they're still not cheap. No.
Right.
And be careful of Winsor Newton Series 7. Winsor Newton Series 7 is not what it used to be. They've had some quality issues. They went through the company went through a big to-do here not too long ago about sable, which is where they get the hairs from, and being able to import them to the United States. Because there was some legal action against that particular animal hair and some protests. We're not going to get into the politics or anything like that. But what I found is that Winsor Newton, if you can find the old ones, super legit, completely sweet. I am a huge fan of a company called Raphael. And the 8404 brushes are really wonderful. And what a good brush does for you more than anything else is it holds water. And by holding moisture and having a good tip, you can really paint fine details without having to go to something like a 000 or a 00 size, which are really tiny. I mean, you're talking like a couple of hairs.
Yeah.
And you don't need that to paint fine detail. if you have a good brush and you take care of it.
Right. I would agree with that. So Craig and I have used the Windsor Newtons before, but now, of course, thanks to our friends at Games and Gears, we use exclusively the D6 generation Games and Gears brush sets.
That's very true.
Actually, though, I do use those and love them, but I also have several other brushes. But I've been really pleased with the Games and Gears stuff as well. So there are some great brushes out there. The key is you may pay a little much depending on where you buy a brush, but the fact of the matter is, if you get a nice brush, you won't be disappointed. You'll be much happier than if you get a super affordable brush someplace that is like dirt cheap, because they just aren't going to work out. And I go to craft stores sometimes too and buy what look to be good brushes there, and they still have problems. So I've really gone to the point of ordering them online from various dealers that are, really brushes that I know are really great, because I don't find them in stores much anymore.
I haven't purchased a brush physically in person in a really long time.
Right.
There are some art dealers that are online that also have storefronts, and those guys. And I think if you look around at what that breaks it down to, it's a pretty small subsection.
Right.
And if you get them from them, they're really good deals. So.
Yep. And also, it's sad to say, but the brushes that are sold by the miniature companies like Privateer and Games Workshop are okay, but they're not at the same level of the brushes we're talking about here. They're just not at that level. You
know who makes a pretty kick-butt dry brush, though? Is Army Painter.
Yes.
Their large dry brush is one of my favorites.
It is, actually. And that's something we should say. So we've been talking a lot about, you need maybe a 1, a 0, and a 3 or 4, some for larger painting, but you also want a dry brush, right? If you're going to use the dry brush technique. And I think, there are some religious wars about dry brushing in the painting community, but as far as I'm concerned, and I know Craig and John, you both are sort of in this school, there's no better way to quickly crank out a decent-looking tabletop model than with dry brushing. So, I'm
a huge fan of it. If you really want to reveal detail in a hurry, dry brushing is genius.
There's no way. You prime your model black and dry brush it with like a light gray, and boom, you can see where everything is now to paint it. It's just like instant. It's an amazing moment when you see a brush your model come to life like that.
There's actually a name for that. It's called zenithal shading, and it's legit, and it's great with an airbrush too, because you prime something black, it's like, well, where'd all the detail go?
Right.
How am I supposed to paint this now?
Right. And by the way, if a guy's wearing black, mostly a black outfit, you've just pretty much, with a little dry brush of that gray there, now he looks pretty done.
That's right.
Pick out his flesh and a couple other items, and boom, model done.
I used to always prime in black, and then I used to always dry brush in a bleached bone or an ivory, and then I would go from there. Lately, what I've done is I prime in black, and then I dry brush in whatever shade the majority of the model is going to be. So if it's mostly in leather armor, I'll do it all in browns. If it's mostly going to be metal, I'll do it in metals. If it's mostly going to be like in grays, I'll do it from a dark gray to a lighter gray to a lighter gray. And if you do all that and you do a couple different levels going up and treat it as if you're already painting the model rather than just trying to reveal the detail, you can actually get half or more of your model painted in the first 10 minutes of just doing a couple layers of dry brushing. I find it really sped my painting up.
So, funny story, you should mention that. My retribution is a testament to dry brush metals plus wash equals whole faction done in no time.
There you go.
Because, and this is a tip to newer painters, when you pick, if you have a lot of models that you think you want to get done, pick a color scheme that is going to be pretty, but also that you feel like could be quick too, because some things paint quicker than other things.
Yes.
Reds paint slowly. Reds reward, and yellows and things like that, which are traditionally very transparent colors, reward a lot of coats and a lot of time. Whereas you dry brush something with some like silver metals, you go grab yourself some Citadel wash and you hit it with a little bit of sepia, boom, all of a sudden you've got antiqued metals that you then dry brush again,
right.
And blammo, you've got all your highlights done, and look at all these elves I've got painted all of a sudden.
Right. Definitely. That's a totally great technique, and your models will look fantastic on the tabletop. I mean, that's the key. And for me, and John, I assume you up there too. My goal is to have my models looking great on the table. So as we play those games and those stories unfold for us, the models just look great, and you're imagining they're there. And so for me, that's all I'm going for as my end game. I know if you're obviously entering a painting competition, that's not probably the ideal technique for that. But for cranking out a bunch of models that look solid, that's a great way to do it. And you'll be surprised. All of a sudden, you'll be like, I just painted that. Especially if you've never painted before, you'll be surprised how great the models look. And you'd be like, I don't really know. I don't think I applied any artistic talent to that. That was just all technique. Right?
Miniature painting.
It does sometimes feel like cheating.
It does.
It does. But, miniature painting is about those handful of techniques that it's you take advantage of the fact that you've got a very small subject, and with the correct shading and the correct application of shading, you can hide so many sins so quickly, and it just you can make things that look hard super easy if you just have those tricks of the trade.
Yep, agreed. So let's get into those. First, though, what do you need to be armed with for paints to do these tricks? And you already talked a little bit that you like the P3 line.
I do.
I also like the P3 line, but the P3 line doesn't have a tool for every situation. I mean, they think they do, but I'd say for me, the P3 paints themselves for the actual base coating, painting, and shading. I love them, and they do have inks. But I think Games Workshop still has the strongest set of washes and inks. I don't know. What do you think with that, John? Yeah.
Hands down. I'm sitting here looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different Citadel washes. Okay, and I use some inks from Privateer, but I'll be very honest. They are very specific use. They don't see general use. Oh my God, Agrax Earthshade is the greatest thing that ever happened to my painting.
And the best thing they could have ever done was to start selling it in like triple size bottles.
Yes.
I know, right? My God, if I could bathe in that stuff, I would.
That in the Nuln oil, and you're all good. You're pretty much all
my
good.
Coffee there. That was awesome. So
question for you, Greg. Do you prefer Nuln oil, or do you prefer the Army Painter dark tone?
I've never used any Army Painter stuff, to be honest. And I really, really like what Nuln oil does. It sort of dulls down the paint, the metal, and it almost gives it a non-metallic look for cheap. I
would love to have you try that. If you can get your hand on a bottle of dark tone, try it out and compare it to Nuln oil. I think it does a better job of giving you a non-metallic metal look that I know you're talking about.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what non-metallic metals are, non-metallic metals is using paints that are not metallic. In other words, they don't have any kind of metal in the substrate of the paint itself.
So it's not glittery.
Right. But you use colors that grays and blues and things like that make it look like metal. Right. It's very that GW kind of look to it. And Nuln oil and this dark tone that I'm describing let you get a similar feel against a silver backdrop. But you can cheat. And super sweet.
Yeah. It's faster.
Because non-metallic metals are really hard.
It's a hard paint technique. It's a very hard. It looks amazing, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah. I'll definitely see if I can't find any P3 primer. I don't know how much luck I'll have finding that, but I'll look.
Now,
sure.
Craig, what do you use for base coat paints? Because I know you're not.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Russ. Well, as in many things in my life, I have wandered away from the GW tried and true. I do like a lot of the P3 paints. A, I think you get more. B, what GW did that I didn't like. Every now and then they go through a massive shift in their paint range.
Yep.
And the last one they did was the biggest one they've ever done. Basically, they wiped out every color, every shade they've ever had and replaced it with probably something that they felt that they could trademark better. I don't know. But they literally got rid of I've been painting with, for instance, like shadow gray for 20 years without exaggeration. Well, actually, way more than that. And all of a sudden, there is no shadow gray. There isn't even a color that's like shadow gray, but it's just called something different. They literally wiped out every color they ever did.
Try Troll Blood Highlight.
Wait a minute.
Can we have a moment of silence for Delvin Mudd?
Oh, yeah. See, now, what was my big one? There was one that I used to use for everything. It was like a yellow, greenish yellow that I used to highlight all grass and everything.
As a former orc player, I liked Goblin Green.
Goblin Green was great.
Can we have a moment for Putrid Green, please?
Yes.
Yeah, we should have a moment for the entire line.
Yes. I know, right?
The original Citadel line. Oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that's about all they get. And what they replaced it with was, we're going to make painting for idiots really easy as long as you don't mind paying for 4 $5 bottles for every color you want.
Fact.
So that's what they did. Like, so there's a base coat, there's a darker highlight, there's a higher highlight, there's a final highlight. Yeah. So you've got every shade you ever need. You just have to pay for it through the nose.
And you don't have a nice middle shade that can get done in one coat.
No. And so what I found was except for the washes and their technicals are great. I love their rust. I love the blood. I love their cracked earth. All those weird technical things that they did that they came up with last year. What's that?
They're amazing. And
yeah, it's like magic.
The new Soulstone stuff that they've been dealing with here. Oh God.
Yeah, so the technicals are great and their washes are great. Their paint range is so wide that I don't even know where to start, because I look at this, I'm like, I don't know, do I want this or do I want that? And then I look over the P3 rack, and I'm like, well, that's as close as I need to get. And so I don't think I've bought. Oh, no, it's not true. I bought an ancient gold GW only because Myriad is pretty much out of almost every useful color P3 paint there is. So they had nothing. I couldn't find anywhere else that had P3 paint. I went everywhere. Again, locally, 5 of these stores. Nobody carried P3 at all, and so I eventually just bit the bullet. And there's one store, the comic store down in Nashua, that has literally everything GW. And I also think Gordon does too. Doesn't Gordon have like that entire giant rack?
He has GW, and he also has Vallejo, which
he has Vallejo.
Vallejo's a pretty good line too, actually.
Yeah. Now Vallejo, interestingly, considering going in the opposite direction of non-metallic metallic, when I was painting up the Marvel superhero models, I wanted to have a metallic red for Iron Man, and the only one I could find was Vallejo airbrush colors, which you can also use a brush for, which is what I did. But they had an awesome metallic red that looked absolutely perfect right out of the bottle. So other than that, though, I haven't really dipped into Vallejo that much. But yeah, to answer a very short question with a very long answer, but wrap it up, I have bought mostly P3 lately. Because P3 does the same general thing where they've got 2 paints, right? They've got the base and the highlight for most of their core colors. And you don't necessarily have to get their highlight, because what I would do is just add a little bleached bone or a little ivory to the base, and that gives me an ideal highlight that's actually the same, it's a lighter shade of the same tone. So that's what I usually do now when I'm dry brushing. But yeah, I use P3. And it has a lot to do with the price, I'll admit it. The GW paints, like everything GW, as far as I'm concerned, and for my hobby, they price themselves out of the market because I don't think they're any better. I don't think I'm getting a better quality product, and I'm paying more, and I don't know why anymore. So other than the washes and the technicals, like I said, which cost even more, or a metallic if I can't find it somewhere else, I go with P3 lately.
So let's talk just for a second about what your next best friend that we haven't discussed yet is, and that's something called a wet palette. And this sounds next level, and it sounds really complicated and stuff like that. But what we're talking about here is a sponge with a piece of parchment paper on it, and you can go out and buy them from Masterson's and things like that. But what they allow you to do is that kind of blending that what Craig was just talking about here, where you take a color and then you add a bleached bone or you add some type of a lighter color to it, allows you to do highlighting and things like that so much more controlled. And then you don't have to go out and buy those extra pots of paints and spend all that extra money. You can kind of, and you develop the skill of blending that way, which is really an important skill. And you feel a little bit like Bob Ross when you're doing it.
You do.
It's very meta. Well,
it's very.
We're running a little long here, but I wanted to make sure we got into a few of these techniques. And we talked about dry brushing, right? And all dry brushing really is painting base coating a color. So when we say base coating, we just mean essentially painting to all the edges of the space a nice, solid, simple color. Then to dry brush, you simply take another shade that's a little lighter usually. You dip your brush. Usually you want to use a brush. And by the way, use a dedicated brush for dry brushing. You will ruin your brush for fine detail once you dry brush with it. So get a dry brush for this, which has usually got broader bristles on it. You dip it in the paint lightly, wipe it off on a paper towel for a bit, lightly, and that'll get most of the paint off. And you want to do this until most of the paint was out of the brush. And then you go over the area very lightly in your model. And what will end up happening is if you do it right, at first it looks like you're doing nothing. But what will end up happening is the paint is only going to hit the raised areas. And what you're going to get is, if you're doing this on a cloak or something, the raised folds of the cloak will be a lighter shade now of the deeper part of the cloak. And you get, or it's actually really, really great on like furs or on like chainmail, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden you're getting a nice light, you're getting a two-tone effect that it's very easy and fast to do, especially in large areas, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I could describe it better than what you just did. When you're doing dry brushing, the thing to remember is as you're wiping that color off on your towel, if you think you've wiped enough off, wipe a little bit more off.
Right.
Because you can always add more. It's extremely hard to get the paint back off.
Right.
So you can always add more, and you want to just rough it up there, get that paint off of there, and then you can just really kind of go to town on the model, and those details will just pop.
And with just that technique, and just understanding how to base coat and stay between the lines and having a decent brush, you can get a long, long way, a really long way. You'll be surprised. There is one more technique I would add to that. And that is washing or inking, which is, to me, is sort of the same thing, although I think there's a slight difference. So, Craig, you do a better job in this. Why don't you describe a little bit how inking works?
Well, I mean, inking and washing is one thing.
Yeah, or describe the difference, too, if you feel like
no, well, I mean, an ink generally has more pigment to it. And I generally try to stay away from inks because they color too much, and what I use the wash for is sort of like to shadow things and it's like almost the opposite of highlighting.
Yep.
An ink goes into the recesses, the pigment goes into the recesses and makes everything shadowy and darker and really brings out the detail and makes the whole thing pop. And to be honest, lately my technique has been completely geared towards getting stuff tabletop ready. And so I want to go fast, and I want to get a good impact with the model, but I don't want to take a long time with each model. And so I will take the model from black. I will dry brush it up to its primary. For instance, right now I'm doing a bunch of characters for Retribution who have bone white armor. So I take it from black. I dry brush using the bone white shades going up as high as I want to go. The whole model is now done that way. Then I'm going to just pick it out like the area painting, like Russ said. So all the areas of the armor that's going to be black, I paint black. Then all the areas like the pouches and stuff, I paint all them leather. I paint the metals silver. I paint all the gems with a mystical blue color, and then I start inking then I'll dry brush. Dry brush the brown, light brown, the black with the gray. Those things, and then I'll wash, and that wash is the last thing that I'll do unless I want to go in afterwards and clean stuff up with a little detail work. But basically what it does is exactly that. It's going to bring out the darker recessed areas, make the whole area pop, and it's going to just bring everything to life and make it look more three-dimensional. Ink is actually going to change the actual color of that area, and it tends to be a brighter color. Like the best example I can give is the worst P3 wash you can get it's actually an ink is their red ink. Mm-hmm. And their red ink actually doesn't do what washer ink generally does. It actually will it's bright and it stays in the recesses, but it's not dark in the recesses. It's bright red in the recesses. And it just makes everything look like a photo negative almost of the red areas.
I don't know how to use that stuff at all.
Yeah, I look at the red ink and I go, somewhere out there, somebody knows how to get some really cool effects with this, but I'm not him.
You know what I use it for? Use it with yellow ink to make orange. And then I'll use it as a fire detail.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's
a good
the only
point.
thing I've been able to figure out how to use that stuff effectively.
No, and fire is key too. That's probably for another day. But fire is awesome too, and you need all those. Fire is all about the washes and the inks, right? So
Absolutely.
So if there's one more topic we could fit in here in another 5 minutes before it's wrap up, what John? We talked about dry brushing, washes. What's one other technique, John, you'd squeeze in here as a good base technique to get things done?
No, I think the next level beyond that last wash step is to come back and do some very basic highlighting. And one of the thing you want to keep in the back of your head when you're highlighting is take your model, put it in front of you, and figure out where is light coming from. And then take, what I like to do is I use a lot of yellow metals, golds, bronzes, and things like that, because I like that color. And then what you're going to want to do is when you're picking out those, think about how I spend a lot of time looking at Google Image, and I'll look like, okay, I want to look at armor, and I try to pick out a picture that picks out the sun at a particular angle. And you can do the same thing with a miniature. And what I'll do is I will use, for like a bronze color, I will use something like a polished gold or a solid gold from P3, and just bring that highlight up on the edges. Don't overdo it, at least at first. Take those highlighting techniques a little by little. Say, I'm going to do this to this model this time. And then the next time, pick it and be maybe a little bit more bold with it. The thing that I think really changed and helped me as a painter was I stopped worrying about what other people were going to think about my models. And I said, I'm going to experiment with this model. My Glacier King is a prime example of that. I had never worked with water effects before. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I wanted to pick a thing on the model that you want to learn about with that model. And I said, what does cracked ice really look like? Mm-hmm. And I said, how can I reproduce that in a miniature? And, used water effects and this stuff from Secret Weapon, which is artificial snow, which you have to put like a breather mask on because it's crushed glass and you don't want to inhale crushed glass, I hear. I hear that's a bad idea.
I guess so. I don't know.
Yeah. And so, take each, be bold with your models, and just don't worry about every model having, oh, well, look at this guy over here. His models are so beautiful. Well, your techniques will get there over time. And, it's not really a technique, but it's more of a philosophy than anything else, is that these are toys. These are things we're putting on the table to have fun with. This is a hobby, and really treat it as such. So I guess that would be the only last tip that I would have.
Well, great. Well, there you go, John. Well, thank you for those excellent tips. We hope everybody enjoyed and got something out of this painting segment. I know I did. I've got several things written down here. Now I got to go figure out if I can wait till Adepticon for an airbrush or just go ahead and pull the trigger.
It's going to be rough.
And figure that all out. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll hear from Total Fangirl, and then we'll be back in a little bit with more with Menoth John.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, total fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakeland and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. Our shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation and you can support the show. Well, today I went to a movie that I've been looking forward to all summer long, and I won't spoil it, so don't worry about it. I went to see Star Trek, the new Star Trek movie. I was really excited about this one because it looks good and it looks a little bit different. And I went to see it and I loved it. Just me and Russ. The girls decided they didn't want to come. They came to see Star Wars with us and it was a little bit like pulling teeth. They weren't as into seeing Star Wars as I would have liked. But Star Trek, they're like, I don't want to go see that. So they did not come with us to the movie, which was heartbreaking for me. I'm like, I want them to like it, and they don't. But we went to see it. So we went to see it. We had a good time, and it was a fun movie. And if you like Star Trek, I'm pretty sure you're going to like it, unless you're going to nitpick it to death and say, well, I did not like in this scene that this was not true to the original series, and it wasn't quite right. And I feel that it was unrealistic that the character, of course, it's unrealistic. It's science fiction. There's an element of not being real to it, of course. And even though there's, they try to do some science technobabble and there's sort of the moral conundrums that make Star Trek so good, it's still fantasy. It's still not the real world. Really liked it, though. there were some great lines for those who are truly like big Star Trek fans, especially of the original series. There's some fun lines in there to sort of harken back to the original Star Trek. But I got into a conversation with someone shortly after I saw the movie, and he asked me, he was saying, Kirk, everyone's following Kirk. I had some issues with it, but, it was okay. And I said, I love Kirk. And he's like, yeah, but if you follow Kirk, he'll probably get you killed. I'm like, that's okay. Because all things being equal, Kirk. And then we got into the classic sort of argument about whether it's Kirk or Picard. Every other captain doesn't even matter. It comes down to those two. It doesn't matter what other captains in what other versions of whatever, who moved up in rank. The only two captains that anyone talks about are Kirk or Picard. So we got into this long, drawn-out discussion about which was better. And this person thought Picard was better because Picard is more level-headed. I'm like, he was a Borg. He's not level-headed anymore. And I said Kirk just because he's cool. I mean, he's sort of like the bad boy captain who's always breaking the rules, yet somehow he survives. And as long as you're one of his close friends, your chances of surviving are pretty good too. Like if you're like the guy down in engineering and he doesn't know you, your chances are zero. Like if you're just some nameless, faceless person, yeah, hold on. Because if you're assigned to Kirk's ship, you're probably going to die. But if you're someone that becomes his friend, then chances are pretty darn good that you're going to live, at least for, a couple of movies worth of time. So my goal would be to join Starfleet, serve under Kirk, and then become like his best buddy so that I would always be the one that he would go back to save and risk the entire crew to save the one guy because it's all about the crew sticking together. So I saw Star Trek as a big trekker, whatever you want to call it. You can argue about that too. I thought it was very fun. I thought it was true to the spirit of the movies, and it was a little crazy, and there were some continuity issues and all that little bits of wonkiness, but I don't care. I just wanted to see Captain Kirk and his crew kick some alien butt, and they did. So it was a fantastic movie. So if you haven't seen Star Trek yet, and you're hoping or worried, and you really want it to be a good film, get ready, because it was awesome.
This is the Dice Tower Network at dicetowernetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. And so, as everyone knows, I'm primarily a miniature gamer. Mm-hmm. And Russ has identified himself most recently as primarily a miniature gamer. And John, of course, is a world famous miniature gamer and painter. And so we decided it would make perfect sense because each one of us, when we were knocking around the ideas about what we wanted to talk about, it all came back to being a miniature gamer. But it was, I want to talk about this little thing, or I want to talk about that aspect. And it all seemed to me that it sort of wove into one overall theme, which was life as a miniature gamer. Okay, that's as good as I can do.
That was, so I don't even know what you're doing.
That was pathetic. It was, a really bad segue. Anyway, we did this once, I think, a long time ago, or a similar topic kind of touched on some of these things. But I know a lot of our listeners are board gamers, card gamers, RPG gamers. Many of our listeners are guys who don't even play games anymore, but for some reason keep listening to us, or at least keep downloading the show accidentally.
Right.
So this is dedicated to you guys. Thank you for padding our numbers. But anyway, what I wanted to do was talk about, what does being a miniature gamer sort of entail? How is it different than being primarily a board gamer, or one of those other types of games? And then how does it differ? The different games that you play will have different impact on how much you're painting, how much it costs, where you're playing your games. So I thought it would be really cool to kind of define what it means to be a miniature gamer sort of through these things that define us. I think I just was terribly redundant, but I'm just going to go with it.
Sure. Fine.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring that point up because on last night's show for my program, Painting with Menoth John, because I can't plug that enough.
No,
we had David Carl on, and one of the first things we talked about was how do you even define what a miniature game is these days? Because the way that board games are being produced right now, it's blurring the line so that it's very difficult to really say what is a miniature game. And I'd actually be interested in hearing your guys' take on what really makes a miniatures game a miniatures game. What is the defining aspect?
Ooh, I'll go.
It's an excellent point, and because there's a lot of blurring.
It is blurring.
There is.
So yeah, Russ, why don't you go ahead?
So I think the quintessential part for me, obviously there has to be little models, but I think the most important part is you have to play on a surface, and I know there are some blurry ones here, particularly with things like Dead Zone, but you have to play on a surface where there's no grid or essentially a board.
Right.
So generally the goal here is that the play surface, its appearance, is the attractiveness of the table and of the whole thing is thing. So it's like a living diorama that you happen to play a game on, is kind of the way I look at it. And that really impacts the whole life of a miniature gamer thing, because it really means you have to find a place, either in your house and you build it, or you acquire stuff to be able to build these scenes that you happen to play on.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And I think that along with that is that there isn't necessarily a set number of pieces or types of pieces. Like chess. Chess is clearly a board game. There are pawns, there are a number of different pieces. Those pieces are set. In a miniatures game, there's more flexibility to be able to make the army yours.
Yes. I think the customization and the painting part of the hobby, while there are pre-painted miniature games, and there's nothing wrong with those, I do feel like the hobby aspect of the miniature game is a big part of what makes a miniature game a miniature game.
Agreed.
And I know there are perfectly good miniature games that are pre-painted, but I don't think there's too many of those. I'm trying to think of one that actually succeeded, right?
X-Wing.
Okay.
X-Wing is the one that jumps to mind.
X-Wing's a great example,
X-Wing, X-Wing, and to a slightly lesser extent because of the fighters, Armada.
Yeah. But that might be the exception that proves the rule, right? Because I can't think of any other one, right, that does that.
No. They've tried,
they have.
but I don't, none of them really stuck around for long.
So X-Wing fits all the bills except that it doesn't have
that hobby aspect.
Part. Yeah.
Although you can repaint your models.
Sure, yeah.
Right. But, as you look at the great continuum of things that are miniatures games and things that are board games, you're always going to have those outliers as far as, this is kind of ends up in here, and X-Wing and Armada are clearly that. But I think that we've kind of distilled down that it's played on a table that has interesting terrain that shows a more cinematic battle front thing. Then that was articulate. And
keep going.
And it has a flexible force that is customizable within rules for what you want, unless you're playing Sigmar, and then it's literally anything you want to throw on the table.
Nice,
and there has to be a hobby aspect to it.
Yeah.
So we ended up in the same place much more quickly on this show. Mostly because there's much less alcohol on this show.
That could be it.
Yeah, see?
But I think that's right. I think that's really the bulk of it. I do agree with you, John, that right after the requirement that it be on a beautiful looking table, or at least a reasonably nice looking table, I do think the list building is a big part of it. And Craig, I'm trying to think of a miniature game that falls into the hobby part and the table, the table part that's not a list building version. I think they almost all have some kind of build it, you sort of design your own force aspect, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, they've got a lot of different takes on how to do list building.
Right, but they all have that customization, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've got some of them just have like 40K or things like that. You've just got lists in a book and you've got to like list them all down and figure out what you're going to do. Others are all card driven, not just the units, but the equipment might be cards also. But yeah. Every one of these is you're getting the opportunity to sort of take it and run.
So even skirmish level games like a Guild Ball and things like that, even that has flexibility and force, which I think is which involves list building.
And they all do a thing with a force multiplier, and that is usually what the lower model count skirmish games have figured out is that if you have interactions and rules between any model, then just even switching a couple models can completely change the play style, right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of these games have done that, and then some of the games do it all, right? Where they have interactions, but then also lots of choices. But I think that's one of the interesting things, and I think that's one of the first parts of how life as a miniature gamer is really that list building and list crafting part. And I know we do share this part with the sort of the deck building folks, right? I mean, deck building people spend a lot of time agonizing over the exact right composition of their decks and collecting all the right cards for their deck. So I guess it's sort of similar. And And I know there's also there's a meta game for them as well, where they're in a world where there's certain kinds of decks that you've got to be prepared for in an event. So is it the same, or what do you think really distinguishes list building for miniature gamers?
I think for me, the difference between a person setting down to make a deck of cards versus a miniature list is that person playing cards is playing a percentage game. Mm-hmm. They're saying, okay, I need this number of these cards and this number of another card in order to have the deck function. So they're playing a statistics game and a probability game. In a list for an army, you have, these are the models I'm taking. They are going to be on the table. They are going to do what I want them to do within reason of dice. So I think it's a different sort of mindset when you're sitting down to make a list. What do I want this list to do? Is it a list that I want to run across the table and get in your face and keep you from getting on objectives? Is it a list that can soak up a ton of damage and can still function? And that, I think, is a different sort of mindset than sitting down and playing the percentage game and the combo game of like a Magic the Gathering or something like that. They both deal in combos, but I think they deal with it in different ways. Craig, your thoughts?
No, I agree 100%. The card games, I'm on record. I don't like them because of what it doesn't entail, but, I guess building a deck is similar, but to me, even as I'm building my force, I'm imagining the models, I'm imagining what they're going to look like, and it's that visual appeal that drives straight to why I identify as a miniatures game.
Well, let me ask you guys this. So, I think one of the differences is that I think you nailed it, John, and that one of the things is the deck builder is looking at the percentage he's going to get a certain card. But the other factor, I don't know that the deck builder really looks at the art. I mean, he enjoys the art on his card, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that he goes, well, this art's so pretty, I've got to have it in my deck.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, I don't know about you, John, and I know this happens to Craig, there is a certain model or a look of a model that has to be on the table.
For me.
So then that means that now I got to figure out, well, what kind of list can I build that model then is well supported, because I've got to have that guy for whatever reason. I like tricorner hats. So I've got to have gun mages. So I'm going to have gun mages. They're expensive. How do I make that work practically in my list, right? Yeah. Do you ever have that moment, John, where it's like, that model's got to be on the table, I don't care about the rules pretty much?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this last Saturday when I was playing in the Full Steam event in Milwaukee, my whole list was predicated on winning best painted. So I wanted Berka, because it's the best painted caster I have. So I was like, well, Berka's really cool. What else would look cool? I know what would look cool. 2 Gargantuans. That'd be amazing looking. So I had my Pink Mountain King and I had my Glacier King. And it's like, wow, that's 2 really cool looking models. I don't have hardly any points left, but I got to stick something else in. It's like, what else would look cool? I've never played the Night Troll. I did a nice paint job on him. Let's put him in. And that's like, it really became just, I ended up with 4 models in an entire 50-point list.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was amazing. You want to play
how'd it do for you?
I went 2-1, and the only reason I didn't win the third game is because, hey, guess what? You can pre-measure in Mark III, and I ran my Night Troll out of my feet range, so he just got trivially removed, and then Angry Mountain King came in and ate my less angry Mountain King.
Oh, well.
But it was amazing. It was this list worked all of a sudden because it actually kind of almost semi-mistakenly synergized with this caster that could really help the survivability of those models. So it was super fun.
That's awesome. So what do you guys like about list building? Does it bring you joy, or do you find it to be a necessary evil to get to figure out what you're going to play? What do you think?
Well, with the right tools, I think it's a blast. I was saying in achievements like War Room or Army Builder, of course, runs the gamut of almost every game you could want to play. Mm-hmm. It's so much fun to put together your different ideas and then to equip your guys if that game, allows for that. And as you're doing it, you're imagining what you have, what you don't have, what you need, how it could play out on the table. And, and you can, if you're any good at it, which clearly I'm not, you can fine tune it while you're like, oh, if I do this, that gives me these points here to come over here. Mm-hmm. And you can really kind of massage the whole thing so that it's exactly what you want as far as the granularity of the game that you're playing is concerned. So I love it.
Yeah, a lot of people call it going into the dojo. and what they'll do is they'll go into the dojo of their mind, kind of like the Matrix.
Right.
You know, when they have the scenes in the Matrix where they're fighting inside the Matrix, and they'll be thinking about their list building as an exercise in puzzle solving. So they say, okay, I want this list to do this. So what are the ways I can stack things on top of them? Because especially in a game like Warmachine Hordes, you can take a theme, and it's called a skew. And you can build upon that skew. For example, there was a skew in Mark II that was known as, it was a theme force that called Elemental Evolution. It was for the trolls. And what it was is you looked at the benefits that you got at these different tier levels of the theme, and you could literally end up with like 15, 20 points above the normal point level, which would be perfect for you, Craig. And that was funny. Yeah. Anyway, so and for me, it's a lot the same way. It's taking a look at, okay, I'm going to start with this caster. What does this caster do well, and what are its weaknesses? How can I do my level best to shore up that caster's weakness, and how can I exploit the living daylights out of what he does really, really well, he or she does really, really well? And for me, going through a tool like War Room, and I have less experience with some other tools, but being able to change models out and look at models and say, God, I wonder what that would do, and then playing it out in your head, and especially the social aspect of it. I will trade ideas back and forth with my friends over Skype during the day, and we'll dojo things out, and it'll be super fun. That's a great mental exercise for me.
Am I the only one that likes to pick like weak lists just to see what happens? Like,
no, not at all.
Sometimes you can throw your opponents for a loop, and they're like, "Why is he have?" That doesn't even make any sense at all. Like, no, it doesn't.
That's the kind of meta you can throw at someone like Blake.
It works on Norbert.
Does it? Oh, there you go. Oh, I love your use of the present tense. It works on Norbert. I would say it worked on Norbert.
I haven't beaten him in Mark III yet. I still owe him a game of that.
Have you ever heard of the format called Biggest Loser?
No.
Okay, we're going to talk about hardcore casual later on, but
right.
This is an actual format that I obviously did not come up with this. But what you do is you pick a point level, and you try to make the worst possible list you absolutely can make. It's just horrendous.
Right.
And then when you play the game, you give your models and your list to your opponent, and you take theirs, and you have to try and beat your list with their list. And it boils down to who can make the worst list possible.
That's hilarious.
I rule at this format. You play Protectorate, you can make some of the most god-awful, terrible lists. And, and then you just pick them apart, and it's super fun.
I want to see the arguments in the forum about which army has the capability to make the absolute worst list, worse than the other armies that can make the worst list.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great argument. It boils down to what armies have the most amount of support.
Yeah.
And if you just load all kinds of support and absolutely no business,
right.
you can usually make a pretty terrible list.
I feel like all Signar chain gunners would kind of suck.
Well, you never know.
You never know. I guess against all, mercenary grots. I mean, I guess
my lists had 3 units of choir and 1 light jack.
Okay, there you go.
Now, do they have to follow all the rules for comp?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, well, there
absolutely.
Right.
That would be tough.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to think long and hard to get some really stinky cheese in that list. Let me tell you what.
That's pretty awesome. So yeah, and I think most companies nowadays, while there have been, good third-party tools out there like Army Builder for a long time, I think most companies nowadays are building in list builders because they know, like Infinity is another good example, that has one built into their website. Obviously Privateer's got one. I think that's really important because I think list building is such a part of the hobby. Having it out of the gate, especially in newer games, is really important.
Agreed. Completely agree.
Well, so I think you had a good segue into styles of play here, John. Let's talk a little bit about some of the ways to play, because one of the things that's really interesting about miniature games as well, and other games have this too, I mean, especially card games, again, have really competitive and also casual play. Board games a little bit, but miniature gaming really has gotten a wide variety of ways to play these games. And let's talk about the kinds we like to play and the kinds that maybe we don't. I mean, obviously the easiest one to get it going, usually if you know at least one of the persons in an army, is casual play, which is just find a place to throw your models on and start rolling dice, right?
Absolutely.
Which I think is a great way to do it, but a lot of us try to gravitate towards other ways to play. John, what were some of the first formats you got to experiment with?
You know, in my early days, I attempted to try to be a competitive player. And I was down that road a number of times. I would play in, organized play events, and, I have a lot of things going on in my life, and miniatures games, while a very important part of my hobby life, I only have a certain amount of time for my hobby. And as I found out that, a lot of these games require repetitions in order to be able to become good at them. I had an experience at a game store that I bet you was a lot like yours, Craig, when you walked away from Warmachine Hordes.
Oh, that team turn? Yeah.
Yeah, where you ran into a hammerhead. And it was such it happened in front of my, at that time, 8-year-old son.
Ooh.
And it was traumatic. And it soured me on competitive play. And I will tell you, miniature gamers can be really wonderful people. They really can be. Just like in life, there's a continuous spectrum of good people and not so good people.
Right.
And I ran into a hammerhead, and it soured me for competitive play. There are wonderful competitive players who would give you the shirt off their back and would, be super great to you. And I hope that anyone listening to this who picks up a miniature game, that's all you ever play in your life. But I don't think that sometimes competitive play brings out the best in people. And so I have walked away from competitive play completely. I just won't play in it anymore. And so I have taken, and we've kind of taken this approach on my show of something called hardcore casual. And that is, we want to be really serious about having a good time. And the way to do that is by making sure that you have, the social contract when you come to the table is both of us are going to have a great time together. And I've got some funny, silly, crazy different scenarios that we can play that aren't necessarily straight out of the Steamroller pack, but can really enhance your ability to have fun and make it from a 2-player game into as many as a 4-player game. And so we talk a lot about that on my show, and we came up with a package of 12 different scenarios called the Hardcore Casual Pack 1. We're going to be running a contest here probably pretty soon to develop Hardcore Casual Pack number 2.
Nice.
But things like, and some of them I'm sure you guys are familiar with. You've seen Thunderdome at TempleCon, I'm sure.
Right, yep.
So that's in there. And we have another one called Hamburger Hill, which has, there's a mosh pit in the middle. It's like 12 inches around, and it has progressive radial deployment. Now, for people who are not miniature gamers, what does that mean? That means that each player is playing in the corner of a 4x4 table, and the deployments are let's say 18-inch radius measured from the corner. But not everybody's 18 inches. The next person over is 19 inches. The next person over is 20. The person after that is 21. So each person becomes closer, and if your caster is killed and you're eliminated, somebody else gets to jump in. And it's a continuous play event so that everybody's playing, and you get 2 tables going, and people are bouncing from one table to the next, and you keep this cumulative number of points, and then after, let's say, 2 hours of play, whoever has the most points wins. And it's really, really fun. And we detail a number of these different scenarios in this Hardcore Casual pack, and it's been very well received, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I really like that idea. I think the important thing is there's different styles of play. And Craig and I used to play a little more competitively. I pulled back on that, as well. Mostly because, cause I've met very nice people competitive play wise, but I just don't have the time to invest in it to really, be able to be, competitive, honestly. But I do like the other, I think Privateer does a reasonably good job of trying to have different events at their venues for casual play, like Iron Arena and things like that are just like, hey, play a game, get some points, win or lose, doesn't matter, and you can get a pin or something nice, right?
Exactly.
And kind of drive that. I'm also liking what I'm seeing in a lot of other miniature games where, in addition to casual and then more competitive scenarios, they also have this idea of narrative scenarios, which I think are really interesting. And these are generally asymmetric scenarios, right? Kind of like some of the stuff you're describing, John, where they're not designed necessarily for an equal deployment or even an equal mission, and one side actually has a disadvantage, but that's part of the fun. See if you can overcome it, but there's a cool story that's going to unfold, right? That kind of thing. Or maybe you connect them together in a campaign. And those kind of, I think, scenarios sort of all of a sudden, to your point, immediately decouple the competitiveness from the game itself, and you're just playing to see what happens, right?
No con does it better than Captain Con when it comes to narrative in Warmachine and Hordes. It's probably the biggest thing that is lacking from that game system. I watch a lot of YouTube channels for miniature games, and one thing I think that 40K does beautifully is it lends itself to cinematic kind of narrative campaigns, and some of the ones that they come up with are just imaginative, and a lot of that has to do with having some really fun fluff associated with the base game system. But boy, Captain Con does such a good job with their what they call scenario tables.
Yeah.
And those are very often, as you said, Russ, they can be asymmetric, but they are always 100% fun.
Yeah. And I think that's really what Age of Sigmar is all about too, is sort of this idea of you're just playing to write a story and don't worry about, game balance too much.
Yep.
Now, of course, there's some desire for a reasonably balanced game, and that's why they just launched their whole point system. But but I still think that's really interesting, and I think that's, there's a spectrum there, right, Craig? And I know you land more on the sort of casual narrative side as well.
Yeah, well, like you said, we used to do we used to travel. We've gone as far as Canada and, as down far south as Baltimore for actual tournaments in 40K back in the day. And that's, I've met some amazing people, seen some amazing armies in the 40K and fantasy back in the day. Those grand tournaments were amazing because you saw such amazing paint jobs, and that's where I really learned I had to kick it up a notch with my conversions, where every model doesn't look like it came out of the box that way. And it was great. And at the same time, you're meeting all these cool people and a lot of those sort of scenarios in the grand tournaments kind of built on each other and total little mini story as you were going. But I think the problem on the reverse side of the competitive play is that you're locked in. So in the first few minutes when you realize that this guy on the other side is a complete and total knob, you're like, oh, great. And here I am. I'm going to be playing you and you don't have a choice. And there's that feeling of being like, that's why my philosophy towards the end of my competitive play was always hope you lose the first game.
Get in the cool kids club.
Exactly. That knocks you out of where everybody's super competitive, puts you right in the middle. And then if you win every game after that, you're night and night in the middle with people who like to paint, they like to play, but they're not, they're not either too good or too serious. So you're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah. you can honestly look at your opponent across the table and go, hey, you know what? I realize you didn't allocate focus to that jack. You know what? Neither one of us are coming out of this thing with a win. So let's just have some fun. Allocate the focus. It's all good. We're just having fun.
Yeah, and that's great when you're both doing that. But in competitive play, you'll sometimes meet that guy where you do that because you want to set the tone, and then he doesn't give you like, oh man, that guy had like an extra inch of movement. Oh, sorry, you took your hand off the model. So it's like a crapshoot. But I think it goes back to what Russ said with time and focus. That like now I would like to get back into something regular. But I just don't have the time to master any of these lists to the point where I would feel comfortable going against somebody I didn't know, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, which is why, again, if we're scattering praise through the industry, Privateer Press and the Iron Arena concept is awesome. Because you're playing to like, oh, where are you from? Oh, what part of the country are you from? Oh, I've never played your army before. Oh, you're a new caster to me. And so you're looking like it really forces you if you're you don't have to do anything, but if you're interested in playing for the spirit of it, you're doing all kinds of new stuff, right?
Right.
I think that's just Privateer Press has done many things right over the years, and even back when I was 40K, do or die, blah, 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 I would always admit that Privateer Press does a lot of things really well. And I think one of the things they do extremely well is that whole concept of the come and have fun at like having a specific event. And I think they had to do that because their other events were so hardcore.
Well, let's give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, that's
Iron Arena was invented by TempleCon.
Yes.
Yes.
And they
and that's where we played it first, Russ, right?
That's right.
Yep. And I think that the New England Privateers really deserve a lot of credit because they pretty much put casual play on the map on the con circuit for the Warmachine and Hordes, and it was something that was very, very badly needed.
Yeah, I agree. So those are some of the examples of challenges a miniature gamer has, and like sort of what kind of venue do you play in, right? But one other thing we should talk a little bit about here before we run out of time, and that's the idea of where do you go to play these games, right? So one of the reasons I think Craig and I used to travel so far to play competitive games was it was one of the few places you could go to meet new people to play. You know, back in those days in like the late 90s, there wasn't that many gaming stores. There wasn't that many places you could go to see new people, to see amazing tables built. And so you had to go to competitive play just to, find more than 5 people to play the game you love, right?
Right.
That's changed a lot, which is great. But what do you do, John? Do you play mostly at home? Do you play mostly in a store? Where do you
I
go
would
to play
say
the
I
games?
probably play about 70% in a store and about 30% at home. And if I'm playing at home, it's because I have a table set up at all times, and I've got it right there by all my miniatures and stuff like that. But I like the social aspect of going to a store and seeing more than just one person, perhaps. I get to see, like a half a dozen people. Maybe I meet somebody new, and also I like to go to the store because I like to support the store. And so I end up going there probably about 70% of the time.
Yeah. And I'm about the same. I like to support the store as well. And I like the one thing advantage the store has. I'm fortunate. We have a store that's got some really cool terrain and a lot of variety. So I really get 2 things out of my store visit. I also have a dedicated table that I can set up and tear down, but my table's always the same. I don't have a very large terrain collection. So it's always, the green grass, a few little sections of woods, maybe a couple buildings, right? But if I go to the store, one day I'm playing in a field, the next day I'm in a swamp, then after that it's a city. He's got a wide variety, so I'm able to see a lot of different places. And then also I get to expose to more gamers as well. So I do like that. But, one of the challenges in our local area, we have a lot of different games that get played. So I'm not always going to find a Warmachine player there unless I go the right night of the week, right? Sometimes I'll run into different gamers. But I actually, as a miniature gamer who is not a single game guy, I actually enjoy that. What's nice about the miniature gaming hobby is even though we may not play the same game, I can appreciate the time and effort you put into your models and your hobby, right? And so I may not enjoy Age of Sigmar, but I can certainly enjoy and appreciate that awesome looking dragon you just painted up, right? And I can admire we talked earlier about how the definition of a miniature game is a cool looking table with cool models on it. And I don't need to know your rule set to appreciate that scene you've set up with a friend in the middle of battling out, right? So that to me is part of the social fun too, even if it's not the game I play.
And I might get a new tip on how to do something too. I might pick up a new painting tip from somebody, and that's super valuable because nobody becomes a great painter on their own.
Right.
I have improved over the years because you have to go into the situation with humility and say, that looks really beautiful. How did you make that effect work? Because painting doesn't have to be hard, but it's very difficult to invent new techniques on your own. Learn from other people.
Yeah. Especially something intimidating like an airbrush. If you see someone who's obviously been doing that, you can ask them all kinds of questions, get into it. So I love that. Craig, I know you go back and forth on this. I know you have a great venue in your own house. Right. Do you prefer playing there mostly?
I don't know. I mean, I enjoy playing at Adler Hobby, where you've got all that terrain, like you said. And it's crazy, flexible, the kind of games you can play and the size of the board and he'll do all that for you. So you show up and you've just got an awesome game, table all set up. At the same time, I put an awful lot of time and money into the pub so that I've got all these different kinds of terrain. I can set up almost as many different things as Gordon can. And I like doing that in my house where I'm more comfortable and casual too. What I don't like, I'll tell you, is going someplace where I feel like I'm somebody else's guest. Like some stores, you know, you go in there and there's the regulars. And I know we've given other people that impression over the years, but I don't like it when I go in, whether it's a store or somebody's home, and I don't feel like I'm kind of like in the majority, you know, it's not my group with my friends, it's mostly them, and they're kind of like, you know, you can come in too, sort of thing. So I know in my house I don't get that. And there are a couple other places where I don't get that, but there are a couple other places that are popular with our friends where I don't feel, you know, I don't jibe with that location. I feel like, you know, maybe they play a bunch of games there all the time, and so they've kind of formed their own group, and I'm kind of like the outsider. And that's, I think where Russ loves games and he loves playing with anybody and meeting people, and I'm much more of an introvert on some levels, and I like playing games with my friends, and I like bringing people into that group, sort of, you know, and meeting new people that way. But when I'm like, you know, I want my comfort zone, basically. And that's why I'm gaming, like, on a Tuesday or whatever. And so that's why I like coming home to my house if if there's some people who can play over here, or going to a place like Gordon's where, you know, everybody knows your name, quote unquote. But yeah, it's either way. And as far as traveling, Ross, I don't travel to play games anymore because of going back to what we said, where I don't feel comfortable at all with my knowledge of any game to go play strangers, but I love going to tournaments and conventions to watch people play, like you guys were saying.
Right.
Like, see the armies, see the terrain, meet the people, ask them how they did, you know, got that effect, or what bits made that piece up. And so I love going out and experiencing that aspect of the hobby also.
Yeah. I do like playing other players for the first time. I think I played Adepticon. I played Antares player for the first time, and you know, but you got to go level set. I always level set. You know, I am not great at this game, so just understand that. You know, if you're hoping for a really highly competitive game where your opponent, you know, doesn't have to keep
or 100% of the rules right.
Right. I'm not your man, but yeah, I really enjoy meeting new people that way. So I'm very much like you, John. I think that's part of the fun, and I really do like you know, Iron Arena and other formats where I play enough Warmachine now with my daughter and a couple other key friends that play it that never really got out of the hobby, that I feel like I know Warmachine enough that I can walk up to a stranger and throw down and not make a complete fool of myself. But
my tact at conventions is I can't remember the last time I signed up at Lock and Load for a Masters event. Biggest mistake I made at Lock and Load. But when Jason Watt eliminated me in the second round, I went over and played in Iron Arena, and I have a little paper tent that I make. I stick it on the table. It says, "I'm Menoth John, and I need a darn game." and then people come up, and then we play a game, and it's super fun.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to go. That's the speed I'm at. So I'm about there with you. I'm not going to teach anybody any new tricks when they play me, but we'll have some fun, and you know, we'll have a laugh, and we'll make a story happen on the table. So there you have it.
And I should say, I love going out and playing with listeners.
Yeah,
I don't want to give the impression that I'm like I hate people or I'm a shut-in.
Yeah, I'll play a game with anybody that says that they've listened or enjoy Painting with Menoth John, because you know, one of the most rewarding things of doing these podcasts is I've had so many people come up to me and say, you know, thank you for, you know, kind of getting me to start painting again and to care about the hobby aspect. And to me, if I've helped make Warmachine Hordes a little bit more beautiful, then boy, I've done a service to the community.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the same thing, and I'm really always impressed by. I think what works for that, and one of the advantages we have because we have these shows, is that people kind of get to know us and our play styles just by how we talk about it. Right. So I think when a listener comes up and says, "Hey, you know, Russ or Craig, I'd like to play you in this game," they kind of know our angle already. So I generally, you know, we really usually have a good time because they're not here to, you know, we don't come on the show and be like, I'm the best Warmachine player in the Northeast, so if you can beat me, you're amazing. You know?
Actually, that's probably why I have a good time whenever I play listeners, because they know us.
They know us, right.
And a person who's like, I'm going to kick you, but probably isn't going to want to play me.
Right.
No.
They're going to be like, oh, you're going to whine through this, Craig. I'm done.
Right. So there you have it. So that's a little insight into life as a miniature gamer. There you have it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard life.
It's a hard knock life.
It's a hard knock. No.
There's your song.
You stopped it. I did not have the intelligence to stop it.
So, John,
I'm going to do your listeners a favor and not sing.
That would, it's good to know your limits.
Probably for the best.
So, John, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the D6 Generation.
It's been great having you on the show.
I have had an amazing time ever since I first found you guys with episode 1 while I was cutting the lawn. I have been a huge fan of your show and of you two in particular. And to get the opportunity to come on here and talk about something I truly enjoy, which is the painting and hobby aspect, has been a real thrill.
Well, you're too kind. And Craig, I heard him say he likes us better than Rafe. That's what I heard.
That's just mean.
So John,
now, listen, just to set this record straight, Rafe is the only one of the three of you I've actually played a game against.
Okay.
Yeah, see?
Did you win?
I did.
And he still said he likes us better.
And that's what I heard too.
I did.
I didn't mean that. I did not mean to jump on this ridiculous bandwagon.
So, John, if folks want to find out more about you and your great shows,
and they've missed the plugs,
and they missed the earlier plugs, where should they go?
The best place to find me is on Sunday nights for the Painting with Menoth John Sunday Night Extravaganza. You'd go to www.twitch.tv/MenothJohn. We're about the only people out there not doing video games on that channel.
There you
go. If you are unavailable at that time block on a Sunday night, we would highly suggest you try YouTube.com. That's an upcoming website. Almost
YouTube?
nobody knows about YouTube.
Yeah, I know. That's a really hot place, I hear.
Yeah. YouTube.com/MenothJohn. And there's also a blog that we post stuff up on, pwmenothjohn.com.
Excellent.
You're everywhere.
He's like, yes, it's excellent. So
we're doing a heck of a job trying to market the living daylights out of it.
You are. So, John, thanks again so much. And I know you won't be at Gen Con, so hopefully we'll catch you if, maybe Captain Con, or if not, Adepticon. Then for sure.
Adepticon for sure,
Excellent.
because it's 40 minutes from my house.
Well, that's a no-brainer then. Well, John, have a great fall here, and thanks for joining us, and hopefully get you on the show again in the not-too-distant future.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye, John. Brought to you by all of our friends over at Patreon who help us day in and day out keep the show running and keep bringing you all of the cool stuff that we think that you're interested in and may or may not be right. Today I'd like to thank Arvid Ozma, Ben Fletcher, we're in the Bens now, Ben Greenman, Ben Methril, and Ben Neitzel. Thanks, guys, for helping us and for sticking with us through thick and thin. We really do appreciate it. Do you ever notice how hard it is to take a compliment for some people? I'm one of those people. It's very hard for me to take a compliment. I often will think that there's some other thing going on, or that you really don't think that what the compliment is true. You're just trying to make me feel better because that's how bad I am. Now, I know this about myself, and I know that it is a running fact of many actors that I used to work with. In fact, if I can just segue a little bit, I might have talked about this before, but I'm still dealing with head injury, so you're just gonna have to deal or turn it off. You totally have that option, but there may be a blooper at the end. I don't know. Russ never tells me these things, so you might miss out. Anyway, see, that's the head injury talking. Where was I? Oh, yes. So in theater, you have the director, and the director tells everybody basically what to do. You've got a range of directorial styles. You have a very free-flowing, what's called organic direction, which is pretty much the director's getting paid for doing next to nothing, in my opinion. And they're just sort of like, oh, do whatever feels natural. That's, in my opinion, back when I was an actor, that was the worst kind of director to work with, because you had no artistic continuity and you had nothing to work with in relation to the other actors. And so you had, if it was a cast of 10, you had 10 different visions going on at the same time. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a very dictatorial director who is going to tell you how many steps to take, how many breaths to take, how he's going to give you your line readings. No, it's not the outer rim, it's the outer rim. everything like that. Of course, that's a bad example because that was a mistake that they should have corrected that kid. Anyway, once the director has given you all of that information, you get to a point called run-throughs where you're going to do the scene as it will appear, or the whole play, depending on how late you are in the rehearsal process. And the director generally is sitting in the audience taking notes. And so what you're going to run a scene, or you're going to run a series of scenes, you're going to run the whole play. And then after that, you all have to sit down and you get your notes. Or, depending on how big the production is, sometimes the director will have assistants who will type up the notes and they will be left on a board for you. And again, depending on how important privacy is to that theater, you'll either get them in envelopes or they'll just be out for everybody to see. Like they'll type up one set of all the notes and you have to go up there and copy the notes that refer to you and everybody can see all the notes. In almost every one of these instances, everyone is hearing your notes. So what I learned over the course of my theatrical career is that I really enjoy a director who understands the psychology of the creative mind, which is, generally speaking, we are very hard on ourselves. And so a good director, and this, I try to do this when I'm working with kids, you need to keep in mind that a creative person is going from a sort of thinking of themselves as a low common denominator, right? So if you don't say anything good about that person in the notes, if all your notes are, well, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, or even if you're a kind person and you're going to frame it in a different way, you could do this better, you could do this better, you could do this better, you could do this better. If there's nothing, and you did this well, then that's going to be experienced as a bad night, as a bad rehearsal. And so I always try, and some of the best directors I've ever worked with always try, I think, to come up with like one little gem that the person did or one good thing where they made improvement, and you give that to them. And that kind of like frames the rest of the work. And I try to do that, have expanded that to when I'm in school, when I'm dealing with students, when I'm dealing with people, if somebody's showing me something that they want me to react to. I always try to find, if they really want me to critique them, I'm going to try to find good things to talk about also, so that it doesn't just come across. Because there are directors, to go back to my analogy, there are directors who legitimately it's their job to fix things. So if there's something wrong, that's what they have to focus on. And so that note session is going to be miserable for everybody. Because it's, okay, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and it just gets to be kind of heavy. And so through that, I have sort of, I think, morphed into, it's very hard for me to take a compliment because now on the other side, I'm like, oh, did you just give me that compliment so I don't feel bad? And so that's, when people talk to me about my books now, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And it's funny because I get some compliments, and things are going well. And this all ties back to I had dinner with my parents a few nights ago, and we had just got back from Maine, and we caught up with them, and we all went out to eat. And my mom turned to me and, like, in the middle of a conversation, no segue or anything, just turned to me and all of a sudden went, "I finished your book and it was incredible." And I was like, oh, my God, that's awesome. And I mean, it was a real moment for me. My mom's very critical. I mean, she's also very supportive, but she doesn't tell me things that she doesn't feel. And she's an avid reader. She tears through 3 or 4 books a week. So that meant a lot to me. And she doesn't generally like sci-fi that much. So that was really important. It was kind of like a watershed moment, I would think. And I've been getting other really good feedback lately. So it was really nice, though, to have that moment. And then she said, I mean, your first book was okay, but I didn't really get it. And I was like, oh, God. Because she had once said she liked it. And I was like, oh, my God, can't you people just give me a compliment? And then flashed back to all my first book when that book went out and people that I know were reading it, incidentally, like people from school would be like, oh, wow, that English teacher wrote a book. Let's read it. One teacher actually gave it to his son for his birthday. And after he read it, I know I told this because it was impactful, but that was like 4 years ago. So he came up to me and went, I read the book before I gave it to my son, and it was actually really good. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? It was actually really good. I thought it was going to suck, but it was actually really good. So I was like, ooh, thanks. So anyway, that's just the moment that I was in. And I was thinking, you know what? Maybe somebody out there could help. But when you're dealing with people in any walk of life, I always try to have something nice to say. If you're critiquing, if you're in a valid position, don't go critiquing if people don't ask for it either. Don't walk up to somebody at a convention, look at their painting, and go, you know how you could make that better? Okay, 9 times out of 10, that is not going to end well inside the other person's head. But I mean, that could be me. You know what? That could totally be me. Maybe everybody else is great and psychologically balanced, and it's all me. Wow, I never thought of that before. Well, anyway, that's about all I've got to say about that right now. So thanks for listening, and good night.
Achievement unlocked. You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@the d6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA discussions forum on DACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
Please know that our third chairs are considered an equal part of the show. So if you feel the need to diverge us off into some tangent.
I am shy like a freight train.
Also, and as you know, since you do a live show, we record this show as if it were live in front of a studio audience. Meaning we don't do any takebacks. So if someone stumbles or missteps or whatever, we just keep going. So we avoid saying things like, we'll fix that in post. Because
oh, God, no.
Because we won't.
Because we won't.
This is anything in post. Post is a joke.
Right. So never say that because, as you know. Okay, good. All right. Anything else? I should say cover anything. All right.
No, not at all. I mean, like I said, nobody wants to edit anything ever.
No, that's right.
I will try very hard to make that something that we can live by.
We claim we want to do this because we want to have it sound like a genuine, honest conversation, but in reality, no one wants to edit. That's pretty much the scoop.